We're starting.
Recording in progress.
All right, good evening, everyone. I will call this meeting, the Transportation and Circulation Committee, to order at 5:38 p.m. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Just a quick announcement, we have refreshments over on the side. Thank you to staff for providing those and keeping us fed this evening. Yeah, so positive. We'll begin with our roll call.
Committee Member Blackerby.
Present.
Committee Member Rodriguez. Committee Member Smith.
Present.
Vice Chair Siegstag.
Present.
Chair Bach.
Here.
Committee Members Bickford and Metzenberg are absent. We have a quorum.
Wonderful. Do we have any changes to the agenda?
No changes to the agenda.
Great. And I'll open it up to general public comments for any member of the public to address the committee for up to 2 minutes on a subject within the jurisdiction of this committee that is not scheduled for discussion tonight. So not the plan, other topics. Do we have any general public comment
We have no speakers.
and any online?
No speakers.
Okay, wonderful. And acknowledging committee member Metzenberg is present. And oh, good. We'll move on to are there any staff announcements?
Thank you, Chair. Just one announcement of I was starting to forecast our calendar because we have 2 more regular meetings till the end of the year, which seems crazy because we're just finishing the first 6 months. But sort of a preview for the August and October agendas is would like to finally return with an update on the bike share program. So that will be coming soon, hopefully in the end of August. An update on the safe routes to school for the upcoming year for a preview. And also kind of a part 2 of the Safe Streets for All for that pilot project on De La Vina. We'd like to return to talk a little bit more about that. And then this year is also another capital programming year, so you'll be seeing that again by the end of the year as well in October. So just little teasers of what's to come on the future agendas. Oh, yeah. And if there's any, I'll check in with the waterfront adaptation plan team as well. There might be one more update associated with that.
Great, sounds good. All right, we will move on to our consent item of approval of the minutes for our last meeting in April. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
And move approval.
In second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Abstentions? All right, motion carries. Minutes approved. Okay, we'll open our main item tonight, the draft State Street Master Plan. The committee is going to review this and hear from staff on the presentation. And then after this item, I think we'll probably have a break before the Safe Streets for All plan. So just so everyone's aware. All right, and I'll turn it over to staff.
Yes, thank you, Chair Bakke. I would like to introduce Tess Harris, our State Street Master Planner, to provide an update on the State Street Master Plan effort. It's been a long time coming. I don't know how many meetings we've said, well, State Street's coming, it's coming, it's coming. Well, it's finally here. So excited for the presentation by Tess and the consultant team tonight. And also for a time check for the second item, we anticipate that to be a very short item. So again, with favoring time on this item for this evening.
Great. Thank you very much. It's great to be before you, committee members. My name is Tess Harris. With me tonight, we also have Stefanos Palazoides, with Mullen Palazoides and Miguel Nunez with Farron Piers, who have been working relatively recently, but for Stefanos working on the master plan, and then Miguel has been working on the plan through the different consultancies that we've had as well. So I am going to walk through the plan tonight along with Stefanos, but really I want to start out with why we are doing this master plan in the first place. What sort of the major key challenges are, what the question before us really was. And there is a later slide that Stefanos will reiterate and talk in more detail on these challenges. But really we're finding that there's been 4 major areas where the community has come out and really emphasized the need for something to happen on State Street and in the downtown core. They are around retail shifts, particularly around Paseo Nuevo when Macy's and Nordstrom closed in 2017 and 2020, respectively. And really e-commerce has changed just the way in which people operate and how people experience a retail environment, the idea of more experiential retail, coming online and less traditional retail being of interest. And probably the most important bullet on this slide is the second one under retail shifts, and that's around the housing need. So we have less than 350 units in the downtown master plan area. It's 3% of our multifamily housing stock overall, significantly smaller than many downtowns strive for. And that number in a successful downtown is around 20 to 25% of square footage is typically dedicated to housing stock. And that really provides the eyes and feet on the ground and people at all days and night in the area. And that's also from a transportation lens, what we are hoping to achieve, having a community that is more walkable, that is closer to jobs and services, and so that is really of emphasis. Aging infrastructure is another one. This is probably the least exciting one from some people's perspective, but it also is really important, and it's around our stormwater infrastructure and our utility infrastructure, both of which either do not exist. So from Carrillo to Coda Street, we don't have a storm drain under the street itself. And for utility infrastructure, we have blocks where utilities are in one location spread all the way out, and then in the next block they're in a totally different location, and just not really, at the time we had placed them in different ways, but didn't place them in a utility or in a cohesive concept, and that it causes sort of major issues when it comes to maintenance and when it comes to thinking about the housing that the plan looks to achieve, which is 1,000 to 2,000 new units downtown at minimum. We want to make sure that we have the capacity for that new neighborhood really to be in downtown. When it comes to mobility conflicts, there are tensions that remain unresolved, as we all know, between cyclists and pedestrians, and also previously around vehicles and cyclists when vehicles were on the road as well. So really emphasizing the mode hierarchy and how we address that, and then activation gaps and recognizing that the center area of this project is the area that has the largest absence of use, and that is primarily due to the fact that it has the least amount of restaurant activity or bar activity. So most of the retail in the 700 and 900 blocks are closing at 5 or 6 p.m. and really changes the feel of those middle blocks after hours. But despite those challenges, there's also a pretty excellent foundation that Santa Barbara has that's very unique for a city of our size. We have, this number is slightly outdated, the 2.1, I apologize, but in 2025, it's increased to 2.3 billion of tourism spending. We have over 1.3 million visitors just to State Street alone in a year. We've seen a major reduction in vehicle versus pedestrian and vehicle versus cyclist collisions since the promenade, as you all know. And we've had a really large annual contribution from the nonprofit arts and culture sector. And we're set up really well. Stefanos will talk about this in a moment, but we're set up really well in terms of parking infrastructure downtown and the number of parking spaces we have per square foot of retail. There also will be a slide later on that'll show you in picture format the sort of history behind State Street. And this is just to give a very high-level overview, but there's much more history well before 1925 that's discussed in greater detail in the master plan document itself. And this slide is intended to really walk us through the fact that this is not a new idea. We are not, for the first time, thinking about State Street. We have thought about State Street in many different iterations, and State Street has evolved and changed, and each time has become more and more focused around a people-oriented or pedestrian-oriented environment. And what I mean by that is in 1964, with the first general plan, we had reference in that document for State Street itself and what the street should be like, emphasizing the pedestrian experience in the downtown core. In 1969, up into the 70s, we began the Plaza Streetscape from Ortega to Victoria Street, the 6 blocks that were constructed, going from 4 lanes of vehicle traffic down to 2 lanes of vehicle traffic and removing the parallel parking on the street itself. Adding some landscaping. Also, that was when we started really emphasizing the need for an overall parking strategy and thinking about our surface lots and parking garages, and the parking strategy is actually what created the Paseo network in our downtown core. That's continued in the 70s and 80s and beyond with the redevelopment agency, and the plaza expanded another 2 blocks down from Ortega to Haley Street, and some additional landscaping and other details occurred. And then we came into sort of where we are today in different iterations. In 2020, we changed the street configuration to not allow vehicles in the space, and we've tested and tried some different elements on the street since then, but largely it's been a pedestrian promenade and remained closed to vehicles. And open to pedestrians and cyclists and users that aren't in private vehicles. And through the later part of the years, the master plan process has been occurring. With the master plan, there are 3 distinct districts that we are wanting to talk about, recognizing that the mile-long stretch of the master plan project area, which is from Sola down to Gutierrez Street, is a pretty large space and should be defined in different nodes or different areas. And so these are the 3 different districts that we are emphasizing within that larger master plan area. And to be honest, this has sort of also naturally created, the arts district has really formed itself in many ways. They've started, a campaign and really given into that idea that they're their own district, which is wonderful. Same in many ways with the entertainment district, and so these are sort of starting to shape themselves, but are in need of some greater design and recognition of how we differentiate that space from each other. I'm going to just highlight just very briefly that there has been a significant amount of engagement throughout this process for the master plan. And these numbers don't include the latest outreach, but there have been many different public outreach events, both at commission, committee, and council meetings, but also and more so in neighborhood events, things like parks and schools and churches, and really trying to meet people where they are in their day-to-day environment and understand how people interact with State Street and what they are wanting to see in the downtown area. And recognizing that this is it's a plan that needs to have an economic component to it, but first and foremost, it is a plan for our community as a whole. It's a civic space in many ways, and recognizing how that combination really comes to fruition so that it feels like an area for everybody. And these were the takeaways that we got from the engagement. I'm not going to read through them all, but things like enhancing walkability and making sure that State Street remains to have a really well-known tree canopy and expanding on that canopy, and balancing access for different mode types with a lot of support for walking, cycling, and transit, and a thriving downtown economy. And going into the real vision of the plan, the master plan is intended to be a flexible pedestrian-first State Street that's rooted in Santa Barbara's history and is adaptable to its future. And with it, there are 10 goals that were identified by the State Street Advisory Committee for the State Street Master Plan. You have a committee member that's on Transportation and Circulation Committee that also served on the State Street Advisory Committee. Really grateful to that entire group for their, just their feedback and getting us through that earlier process, which certainly wasn't easy, but it lent us to a lot of pieces that have made their way into the plan. And I really want to highlight this slide here before we go into the design, because any design that we think about, we are looking back at these 10 components and making sure that we are meeting as many of these or all of these to make the master plan really successful. I'm going to turn it over to Stefanos now to walk us through the design portion of the project.
Thank you, Tess, and thank you all for your time this afternoon. This has been about a 6-month process for us, and a very engaging one, a very complicated and engaging one. So I hope to be able to give you some very fast description of what was involved in this process, and maybe take your questions and go from there. I want to begin by reminding you that, particularly in the age of AI, history truly matters. And history matters for a couple of reasons. The first one is because change is absolutely inevitable. It is inevitable for reasons that have to do with changes in society, in customs, in choices, in technology, in all kinds of reasons for people thinking about the places that they inhabit, both in private and in public, need to be advancing according to this newfound and newly addressed conditions. The other one is that this change, most typically in urban development, has a vector. And the vector in this case is unmistakable. And you can see it in this image, the vector is taking cars away and introducing public space and landscape in a way that accommodates, nonetheless, a multiple number of modes. This is very important to understand, that the reason why pedestrian-only streets failed in the 70s, 80s, and 90s was because they were introduced cold turkey in many ways into places that did not allow for parking to exist peripheral to those streets that enables pedestrian presence. And that is not the case, certainly not the case here. I mean, you have to imagine how important and radical it was to remove the holy grail of main streets in the 1960s in parking on the street, to remove it and to allow the streets to exist as greener places, more publicly accessible park-like places throughout the entire length of State Street, and to back that up with major investments and major commitments to parking that allows people to reach the street laterally and throughout its length. It's one of the secrets of why we've gone so far and so long with such a long Main Street, which is longer by far than any Main Street that I know in the United States. Most Main Streets are 3 blocks, and this Main Street is 9 or 10, whichever way you count. So the next image reminds us of this question, this brief summary that I gave you in a more concentrated way. There are 3 distinct areas. They have developed like that over time. One of them, the northern one, is dedicated more to the arts with, of course, commerce involved. The second one into civic uses and some commercial as well, but big concentration there because of Paseo Nuevo fundamentally. Then there's an entertainment district. Then there's the funk zone, which is much more conventional because it's car-oriented. And then the waterfront at the pier and the beach. So really important to understand that parking is really the fundamental driver and the definer of how these places work. As well as, of course, access to parking and number of lanes, movement of lanes, and so on. And it is the common practice, the common understanding of where one gets into a mixed use, a successful, certainly Southern California would be a national model of mixed use development in the balance between parking numbers and ratios and square footage for retail is in the approximately 2 cars per 1,000 territory. This is true in Beverly Hills, it's true in Santa Monica, it's true in Culver City, it's true in Pasadena, it's true in all these places that are operating at this level approximately. Some of them are bigger than you, maybe in the 1.5 million to 2 million, 2.5 million retail spaces, many more garages, but they're all operating on the same basis. And you have it here. Clearly, you have a great distribution and ratios of distribution between parking and public and commercial space for all three of these districts. And overall, you have 800,000 square feet of retail availability and 4,000 cars, which is approximately 2 per 1,000. There's even in terms of distribution. If we go to the next one, in terms of distribution, and I'm going to the bottom left, I'll start with there. You can see that the distribution is excellent. There's still some gaps, which probably argues why the southern portions of State Street are slightly weaker than the northern ones. So there's a possibility for encouraging some more parking in those areas, but by and large, it's a pretty it's a pretty exceptionally good and very much by the book relationship between retail, distribution, and parking. And you can see the top and the bottom diagrams here illustrate, on the left, illustrate that perfectly. The retail stretched out and the parking behind it doing all of that. The thing that makes, of course, State Street so very important is probably the most important, architecturally most important main streets in the United States. I mean, the kinds of buildings on it, when they're built, how they relate to each other, how they make the public space around them, how they concentrate the civic realm, particularly in the central portion of State Street, is absolutely exceptional. Certainly the best main street in California, if one didn't want to make comparisons further out. And on the right-hand side, building service is largely in place, not entirely, but mostly in place. And there are bicycle networks, transit now in the electric vehicle takes people north-south, and where we're slightly underwater is in the provision of open space, which is rather limited in this one street, but probably more amply available further around us. It's very much of a narrow proposition to look at this as just a planning area. It's so very narrow that sometimes in analyzing one comes up with deficits which are amply taken care of a little bit further out. This is an important slide in that I think you spoke about it before, Tess. There is mobility issues, there is retail issues, there is infrastructure issues, and there is landscape and ecological issues. These 4 things are important. Were important in the work we did in trying to understand the situation here. It's important in the work that was done before us in outreach. And most of the comments we've heard from committees and commissions are about these questions. And therefore, I would like to argue with you that I don't think it is possible to resolve this question by favoring any one of these positions alone. And the brilliant aspect of a strategy, which is a flex strategy, is that it accommodates the needs of all the people that are advocating for these 4 positions separately. So maximizing one against the others, I think, is an issue. Putting them all together is what this project does. And a flex design is a design that allows proper access, multimodal access. I omitted to say in my opening comments that the standard was not in the way in which this main street evolved over 100 years was not only trending towards a park-like environment and excluding cars, but it was also a place where multimodality was essential. And I think this multimodality needs to continue. In other words, it's not about one mode, pedestrian or bicycle or car or service vehicle or transit, but it's all of them in their own measure for an environment of this kind of intensity in this kind of place. The method of operation can be varied in a flexible design to accommodate itself to the conditions in place. All of the modes, of course, are important. It's terribly important. I'll talk about it later. There has to be a business plan, I think, to make this happen. Opening up the street or taking any other measure that is mobility-based can only accommodate for a small part of what needs to be done to make retail in this area important again, and to make this the destination that it used to be. And then, of course, there's the question of the flexible design, limiting traffic conflicts. In other words, being a safer place, and also a place that is possibly well accommodated in terms of infrastructure, can sustain larger civic events, right, that are unique by being open and closed and being properly accommodated in terms of electricity, gas, et cetera, to hold larger events that happen throughout the year. Now, I would like to suggest that, let me say first of all that we have a practice at Monopoly that is very diverse. It's very diverse, and it does not depend on going around and closing streets and arguing for this solution everywhere. As a matter of fact, this is the first time in 40 years that we've suggested that this should be the solution in a place of this kind. I have known personally Santa Barbara myself for 45 years. I've been here as a citizen for 45 years. So I witnessed this place in the beginning of the previous state of affairs when parking was taken out, and I've seen its extraordinary development as a first-class downtown, and its decline since the end of the previous century. And so it is important to understand that this is a good faith idea about how a project like this could meet the very diverse requirements that make this kind of challenge possible in facing a future that continues to benefit not only the people involved in this particular area, but all citizens of the city. It's a very simple way. There's a very simple way for me to explain this project. It accepts and I'll show you where exactly, that the streetscape as it is in the northern and southern portions. In the central portion of the street, it argues for a change in streetscape to give the center greater visibility. There is 20 feet in the middle, which are inevitable. There are 2 travel lanes for emergency vehicles, and those have to stay there in a central clearance, and there ought to be 3 feet on either side for flex use, opening doors and parking and things like that in case of emergency. And then we have 30 feet on either side to be used for pedestrian sidewalks, both for sitting and enjoying the place and for moving north and south. One more thing is that instead of I think it's important for you to note that this alternative, there is only 20 feet of space dedicated to movement, and 60 feet of space dedicated to activity in place. Any other solution than this would take the movement in place, whether it's blacktop of any other finish, and have that predominate over the idea of a park-like environment. In the evening, and I think the times of operation in a flex alternative are an issue to be negotiated and to be understood on its proper terms, perhaps even to be experimented with over time. This is the middle portion of the street where we have the new landscape. It's a sycamore alley of trees. Again, proper lighting, same conditions. I'll talk about those in a second from a retail perspective. But the 2 operations, 2 conditions, mostly pedestrian and bicycle dominant during the day with the bollards up and the bollards down at night and overnight and the early morning, there for service and for the presence of cars, people in cars, in security in the times where there is almost no people there on bikes or walking. Next. And just a reminder that there is a way of dealing with the zoning, the micro zoning of this area, which on the sidewalks allows for a frontage zone for sitting, a through zone for sidewalks, and then a 4-foot zone for general placement of all kinds of issues, bancos, bicycles, and so on. This 3-foot zone which is a flex zone for opening up, parking a little bit for extra parking and for opening doors, etc. And then the lanes in the middle and the symmetry on the other side. And we'll talk about the positioning of the bollards next. So the bollard question: why are the bollards placed where they are? What are they? Obviously, this is a means of controlling traffic modes in a way that introduces safety and allows bicycles and pedestrians during one phase to predominate, and by coming down at night, it reverses the use pattern, and it can be controlled very, very flexibly. Different kinds of people the transit people might have different kind of access. Actually, the transit people could probably pass between the bollards because the bollards are 5 feet apart. But emergency people who have special deliveries to make of construction related and things like that, all kinds of accommodations could be made to allow for passage. The lanes are very, very tight. The materials, as you will see in a moment, are chosen in a way that frustrate the concept of speed in cars. So we're expecting really cars to move at about 20 miles per hour. And so this is really an environment of pedestrian dominance, but with openness to multiple modes. This is a reminder that two things about this, without getting into too much detail. The middle portion here you can see are the 700, 800, and 900 blocks. The top is 4, 5, and 6, and the bottom is 1,000, 100, and 1,200. The top and the bottom, we are preserving the landscape and extending the sidewalks and having much more pedestrian space. In the middle, we're doing the same, but we're changing both the ground and the trees, probably because there are all these peripheral eddies of space, as you can see on the right-hand side in the middle. We're thinking also those might be places where we might have much more elaborately designed public space and public activities. And the typical conditions of every block allow for, and this is one example, allow for this tightness of the space in the middle. We have places we have parking places, for transit stops, and maybe even for evening stops for deliveries and so on. One on either side. There could possibly be 2 on either side if we have to. And there's two. There are narrow bulb-out crossings in the corners, and there's two pedestrian crossings in the middle. And of course, at the volume of pedestrians that we are expecting and we're seeing on Main Street, and the narrowness of the lanes, I would imagine people walking clear across the whole thing commonly. And of course, in the middle, just a reminder again that we're keeping many of the very special trees, and as you can see, the special trees here that are not the circles, and the others are sycamores in a pattern again in a pattern of landscape development, which allows for beautiful canopies that mitigate the effect of summer heat gain, and also are very, very typical of the kinds of environments in Southern Europe and South and Central America that are very typical of this kind of public space development. You can go on from here. This is very. Oh, there was one thing here. I believe that is important. No, that was in the first one. Can you go back one? There, I just want you to see that on the 500, on the 400. One more, please. On the back, on the 400 block, there is a need to have bicycle lanes and to keep the traffic in place until such time as Gutierrez and Haley are converted into two-way streets, because Haley is the fastest way of coming all the way across town to access the beach. That was an explicit requirement of emergency services. Next, and here we have the intended details of the public realm. There's a lot more in other places in the world than our cities in the United States. But it's important to remember that paving matters extraordinarily. You can see here, and we're advocating in the top left for a continuation of the brick paving in the north parts and the southern parts of the street, maybe special stone in the central portion, and then special intersections, not raised intersections, and I'll explain to you why in a second, and then special paving for the bicycle lanes and the central lanes that allow allow people to pay much greater attention to their speed and to the relationship to other bicyclists and also pedestrians. Next. The amazing canopy, planting under trees, yes, but not in the way it is now, which is so tall that you cannot see from one side to the other or cross from one side to the other. Then, of course, excellent lighting of various kinds, sitting arrangements, definition of space for eating and external activities, which is flexible. These probably would be barriers that can be removed in the evening and introduced as necessary. When one puts all of this together, I think it's important for us to understand, really for you to understand, that this is not a plan for what is ready to be designed and built. This is really a concept plan, and in concept plans of this kind, we need to resolve the big picture questions. We need to ask the question, what are the systemic issues here that make something like this work? How can we conceive of a way that takes a half dozen basic issues here that we just discussed and puts them together in the way that works? Now, exactly how we design the sidewalks, exactly what we do with public space, exactly what every tree we would choose would be. I think those are issues that are going to have to be addressed when we enter the schematic design phases. And I think you should really, I'm sure, Tess, that this commission will be part of those kinds of discussions. So we took the liberty to actually put down here some drawings and images that transform the current condition, which is a leftover condition from the time the street was open and the way it was designed in the 70s, into what I just described. So this being part of the central portion of the middle three blocks, you can see that the illustration here shows people bicycling on the part of the carriageway that has a softer, perhaps stone or concrete finish, with slightly more three-dimensional, slightly rougher kind of edge, one that would interfere with pedestrians, but which is actually a reminder to people on bicycles that they should stick to their lanes. And then there is a rolled curb, which differentiates between the street and the sidewalks and allows us, it's probably a 4-inch, 5-inch curb, and differentiates the two enough that we don't have to put bollards for 9 blocks. And that I think is an extremely important subject. You can see the little space that's available between the street and the sidewalks. It's the 3 feet that allow for this kind of excess space for opening doors and parking if necessary in case of emergency. But it also provides a place where a pedestrian can stand, right, and look right and left and make sure that they can cross. And then the next 4 feet, you can see bicycles and bancos and so on. So this is really a kind of first impression about who uses the right-of-way of the lanes. You can also see the transit vehicles coming down, the small electric buses coming down, and the whole thing really is a vision of a place with a beautiful canopy in the long run. This is probably a 10-year view of this, and a place that invites this kind of park-like sense that people leaving the cars in garages can actually come and enjoy the place and know where they are and return easily after the 3 or 4 blocks that people typically do walking in an environment like this. The second image takes the northern part, the arts part, very similar idea. Notice how lopsided many of these original circulation lanes were, and when you center them in the next slide, you can see again that it becomes a whole place. It is absolutely essential that this idea go from end to end and treats this entire place as not so much as a park, because it's still a street, but as a place that operates in this kind of open way. Because even at 1,000 bikes at maximum circulation time, you know, there aren't too many vehicles on the street, and the idea of being able to walk across it and go from one side to the other, understand it and feel it and experience it as a whole is really a very important part of the design idea, of the way in which people can appreciate, all people of all kinds appreciate and enjoy this place. Next. And of course, there's the question of special events. This is a pretty haphazard situation as it is now. In the future, next, it will be one that is by far more organized and connected to the zones that have been defined by this design and allow for this and probably many other events to take place, and protected with bollards instead of this very big, ugly, and unsightly planters that are there right now. Next. Well, there's just random planters. You're used to them, but basically, I think for me, coming here every couple of weeks, you know, this street used to be by far more organized and by far more presentable as a destination. Every single place, superior retail place in our country, and certainly in our state, is very well maintained. It has an image that it projects. And I think increasingly, I mean, there is dying trees and dying plants and all kinds of randomness in this place. It doesn't speak very well of what it is and what it could be. And here we have an augmented conditions. This, by the way, could be the condition of what happens for a couple of years before we end up with the new scheme executed. But you can see that in the transformed scheme, it becomes a remarkable paseo, really, on the side of each sidewalk, with people being able to enjoy this place in a variety of ways, and very unusual from an environment perspective, because in most places in our country, the trees find themselves at the edge of the lanes, and in this case, the trees would be in the middle of the sidewalk. So there would be ways of spreading their branches and defining the sidewalk in an enormously unique, in a really unique, in a very unique way. And then I would like to finish with discussing some of the summary technical information we received from consultants. Miguel is here, so you could answer a lot of questions about parking and circulation. But we have about 1,000 at maximum flows. We have about summer. I don't remember what month that is. Summer. What is that? Midsummer.
It's
July and August.
July and August.
about 2,000.
We have what? I'm sorry.
It's about 2,000 on a weekday, or almost 2,500 on a weekend. This was back in 2022. The counts have increased. but-
Okay, so there are 1,000 each way, and you know, right. So and I want you to know that this is really an extraordinary situation. I mean, I don't think I know of any other place in the United States that has this kind of density of bicycles in place. There are some problems with these flows in that some bicycles are going very, very fast because people are commuting. There is an electric bicycle crisis in the U.S. Hopefully that can be mitigated in part by the definition of the lanes and the design of the lanes. Maybe when we talk in the future about rethinking Chapala and Anacapa, maybe there could be a speed bike lane on Chapala that you know frees this to be a much more relaxed place. But nonetheless, there is a condition of bicycle movement and pedestrian movement, and a mitigation of very major issues relative to accidents that are stated, I think, in much of the information that you've seen, that really needs to be taken into account here as a piece of information that determines what the final solution for this project is. The second one is really the question of the infrastructure. And you know, there have been floods here. Some of you experienced them. You know what I am talking about. And the most important consideration is that the street, from being concave, has to become convex and receive the water, have the water flow, and therefore has to flow through intersections as well in a concave manner. And then underneath the entire thing, there needs to be a 5 foot deep, or so, 4 to 5 feet deep gravel pit that receives the water, so the water flows more effectively without spilling to the sides, and also is retained and it percolates. And I think this actually is this condition is the one that mitigates the question of whether this ought to be a flat plaza or a shaped space. And I think you can see how important it is to consider this a shaped space, because this idea allows for the redevelopment, the reuse of every building, actually the reuse in the case of historic buildings, the redevelopment in other cases of properties up and down this 9 blocks in a way that cannot be done now, because all water has to be retained on individual sites now. And on the question of I think this was a question of the regarding the is the diagram following here? Okay, so the question is how do we deal with these intersections? Can we look at this intersection? This was a diagram that we started with, which showed the in red the bollards on the bicycle side of the equation, because we thought that the pedestrians need to be protected from the bicycles as well as the cars. But in further discussion, we're bringing now we are bulbing out the intersections to reduce the crossings, and we'll bring the bulb outside, so people are not tempted to actually turn and use that area for stopping in. And also, I think it's important for you to understand that probably 50 to 100 feet on either side of this intersection, all 4 sides of the street, there's probably some accommodation to be made during future design about drop-offs and pickups and vehicle service vehicle arrangements and all those kinds of things that will allow the streets to work more actively and better. And I don't think also, if I can say this as well, I don't think that building 1,000 or 2,000 units is going to mean that there are going to be people walking, 2,000 families walking alone. There are going to be major number of cars as well under those conditions, because of the nature of the city and the way one works even and lives even downtown. And so we need to make absolutely sure that the servicing of residential and retail facilities and the sharing between residential and retail and entertainment, parking, and so on is designed in a way that makes sense. The flat and flexible concept I described, I think it has to do primarily with the issues of civil engineering. We have to allow the water to be both to pond underground and to flow, so that takes care of that issue. And I think this is it, is it? The bollards. I'm sorry. Okay, sorry. A couple of more. Can you go back, please? And this we were asked to show this, a couple of weeks ago, because of the flat issue with no curbs would bring forth the idea that pedestrians would have to be protected from vehicles of all kinds, including bicycles, all moving vehicles, and there would be a need, I think, by code for having bollards on the nine blocks, which is what this is showing, and that's beyond the issue of the infrastructure, the civil infrastructural question. And then, just a reminder, I think I would like to finish, I think it's 2 or 3 more images. I would like to finish by telling you that we paid significant attention to the question of how one generates a superior environment. This environment is already superior. The question is, can it actually live up to the demands for a 21st century regional center that is a major destination, by taking these 10 conditions, which I'll read to you because they're important. Access and signage. How do you help people to come to the parking garages and to go from the parking garages to State Street? Parking, surface, and structure. How does that get distributed in places and in buildings that are part of a larger fabric? You're doing this brilliantly in Santa Barbara. How do we introduce a street-dependent landscape that is unique? How do we combine retail, dining, and entertainment in a way that works together to define the nature of the place, as opposed to being as discordant as it is right now? How do we introduce public programming? Housing is an essential question. I think it is just an accident of history if this is really the project, just the street. It's the bigger downtown question that is really the issue and the project. There have to be many more important questions asked about how one builds housing here that also affects the way in which the street is used. Quality of storefronts, extremely important. And I think you're ahead of the game there, where your buildings are so important and so visible and so architecturally distinguished. The transit question, I think we're introducing, and we hope we're going to be heard on that one. Lighting, both street lighting and business lighting is fundamental. And then the question of safety is extremely important, and I think the opening up of the street at night to private vehicles is part of the question of safety. Next. And then here's something that I actually would like to read to you this time. In the morning, I asked Tess to read it, but I think this is going to be very important because there's an illusion that retail will return.
For the folks on
There is an illusion that life will return to normal on the retail front if only we opened up the street to cars. And well, there's some chance that this actually may be the case. But when you look at what everything else that needs to be done to return, and I have 10 items here to bring business activity up to par, you realize that this question of opening up the street might not be as important as it seems, because in any case, the driving by activities is not really as important anymore in the 21st century as it used to be, because we have telephones. We can find who's open, who's closed, and we know where they are, and we can go find them. I did that twice today, by the way, in one morning. So, item one of how we bring back retail prosperity downtown: encourage a wide selection of businesses, brands, and price points that appeal to the entire community and all visitors. In other words, don't make this a high-end place, don't make it a low-end place, don't make it a visitor place. It's a place for absolutely everyone, and that has to be curated. This is a curation question. It cannot be done randomly. Consider block-by-block management to better respond to changing market trends and community preferences. In other words, think of the management question of BID or your BID as a method of maintaining and extending the nature of the mixes and the qualities and of placemaking of each business, and intervening also in case people are doing things blatantly wrongly, which is pretty evident in walking around today. Implement store, civic, and brand wayfinding system along the entire street and from street to parking. This is absolutely essential. You find yourself in a place like this as a newcomer, or even as a citizen, and it is very difficult to know where you are and where you're going and why. So graphics extremely important. Performance-based parking. I think this is very, very important to encourage pricing that responds to more expensive parking for places where places full, and virtually free parking when there's no one here on a 24-hour basis. This is very common. I think already in Southern California, it's happening absolutely everywhere. Convert Anacapa, Chapala, Gutierrez, and Haley into two-way thoroughfares. This is not something that's going to be done by fiat. That's something that's going to be done by study. But I think it's something that is absolutely important to establish technically. Miguel, because we know that it's exceptionally difficult to leave the freeway and come, what used to be a highway now, a freeway, to exit and find anything that you want to find on State Street, because by the time you start thinking, you're north of the downtown because of the speed of the streets and because of the difficulty of turning left, and because once you turn left, you can never turn right again without being in another territory, and then you cannot come back. So certainty and ease of wayfinding by car is the #1 issue of the performance of a retail place for people who are not walking because they happen to live there and know how to go back and forth to the house, which is probably a fairly small number of people using the street. So study that and make sure you understand why it should or should not be done. Repurpose potentially underutilized properties for community use and for housing. That's already happening, and I think it's very important. And the redo of the infrastructure would help that significantly. Explore public programming and events that encourage diverse activities, celebrations. Use this. Return to the issue of what a city center does that as a unifier for a community. initiate a specific plan to enable infill housing. I think the infill housing question, in my mind, and I'm speaking from experience, having worked elsewhere, I think this is something going to be done in, it doesn't have to be done in 3 years, something can be done in a month. If it's possible to infill all the open spaces and write a code that allows people to do this, that supersedes all existing conditions and gets that done rapidly. And finally, I think there ought to be a way of reducing the time necessary to issue retail licenses. Any plan that we have that takes 1.5 years for somebody to have a business is out of line. And so you can see that these 10 things are really the conditions that are determining the retail future of this great street and this great retail destination, and not only the question of opening it up. And opening it up really might also be assessed from the perspective that after 2017, 18, 19, the street had already begun to drop in terms of performance before COVID. So we also have the prospect that we could open the street up and nothing would happen. And so whatever happens in the future, one way or another, we really have to think of this in a very, very complex way. Anyway, thank you for your time. I think we have a situation here where this street is so important to the future of your community. It's so important to the future of the state and the country, really, as a destination, that the decision to go forth with the next 30 or 40 years of its life is a fundamental and important challenge that needs to be.
I'm going to talk through the implementation portion of the master plan really quickly, and then we'll open it up for questions and comments from the committee. So going into implementation, we talked through the first 5 chapters of the plan. Chapter 6 of the master plan walks through a high-level implementation plan, including action plan items and a funding strategy and overall phasing. At a high level, we're looking at multiple phases for this project. Really, the first phase, what are some things like what Stefanos mentioned that can be done as soon as possible once this plan is approved? Things like looking at purchasing and beginning to install bollard infrastructure where appropriate, advancing the detailed engineering and construction-ready documents so that we can actually get to construction. Expedited permitting, things like small business loan or grant programs, wayfinding, signage, things that we are hearing that is certainly needed and can be done much sooner. At the same time, then the next stage would be, as we are teeing up the construction level documents, would be then gearing up for 2 of the districts that we talked about and going into full construction for those 2 districts. And then in phase 3, finalizing with a 3rd district, and then working on some other elements as well, as we're thinking about really reinvesting into downtown and programming and other aspects of the action plan that I'll talk about. But before I get there, I want to talk about the funding piece for this project, because this is the question I get asked out in the community all the time, is how are we going to pay for this? And I think I want to start with this question by saying that there is no city project that is inexpensive to do. They are all challenging, and this is our downtown. It's a street that is representative of the entire community. It's not a street for one neighborhood or another neighborhood. It is literally the downtown street for every single resident of the city of Santa Barbara. And it deserves a reinvestment from our city that frankly has not been investing in downtown since the 80s. We have not seen major updates in terms of landscaping or pavement. And it really is time to make that investment, and I'll talk through some of that as well. There's also a lot of different funding strategies. So when I have a big number up here of $6 to $8 million a block, and that is a very approximate number, so I'll start there. But that is a general estimate. I think it's fairly accurate. Even though that number is large, there are lots of different pots of funding. And so we are looking at state grants, like the Active Transportation Program grant. We are looking at there's a urban greening grant that the city is applying for as well through the state. And we're looking at other areas there, both state and federally. And so I just want to highlight that, because I get that question all the time, and it's not it's not that we are looking at taking this much funding out of the city capital budget. We are looking at other resources, and I do believe, given the city's just success in getting funding for different projects and the importance of this project in connecting our downtown to our neighborhoods and to our other active transportation projects, that we will be successful. Going into some of the funding considerations, even if we didn't move forward with the master plan, the stormwater and utility infrastructure is something that sooner or later the city is really going to need to deal with. I mentioned earlier, we don't have any infrastructure between Carrillo and Coda. If you go down when it's raining, and it doesn't have to be a large rain, if you go down, if it's raining at all, you will notice that there is a challenge on State Street with flooding and as we're thinking about climate and adaptation and what does the city do, we really need to start upgrading our drainage system to meet current standards. The same goes for utility infrastructure. Like I mentioned earlier, we have utilities in many different locations, and if you go and see work that's done on State Street, sometimes there'll be something happening on one side of the street, and then a month or two later, we're digging up another side of the street, and it's because we have lines all over the place. And this could be an opportunity to really bring utilities into something called the utilidor, or locating utilities into the same location so that when maintenance work needs to be done, you have them all sort of confined in one area. And there's opportunities also to be looking at how, do we want to relocate utilities to adjacent streets like Chapala or Anacapa? I think that's unlikely. I think we would move towards a utilidor concept. But that is critical as well. And when we're thinking about more housing stock, we also need to be thinking about the capacity, both from a stormwater standpoint and from a utility standpoint, of how we are servicing those different units. There is an action items matrix in Chapter 6 in the implementation section of the plan, and there's many different elements there. I just highlighted a few on this slide. We talk about different potential capital projects as well as different planning and regulatory projects, things like the bollard infrastructure or amending zoning to allow for additional uses in the downtown core. And we have pretty lenient zoning there, but there are areas that we've seen that could be amended to facilitate things like work-live environment or some light manufacturing use. Adopting a stormwater in lieu fee program so that if a property owner wants to build housing in the downtown core when they're at lot line to lot line and they don't actually have any space to put anything that would accommodate something above a tier 2 level stormwater requirement, they could instead pay into a fund, and the city could actually build a stormwater project that would have the capacity that could accommodate those different private developments. And a State Street Paseo reconstruction, or State Street Paseo plan, is also in the planning section of the action items matrix, but really looking at our Paseo network and how the Paseos are connecting to both the parking lots or garages as well as State Street itself, and where those missing pieces are and how we move that forward. These are the specific items that council took action on April 28th. I'm not going to read them verbatim, but I'll summarize them for you. On April 28th, we took almost this exact presentation to City Council. You are seeing more than what council saw. There have been some changes and additions to this since then. But we really wanted to understand from City Council whether we could move forward with this draft proposal and whether there was enough interest in the State Street Master Plan moving forward and getting finalized before we continued with it. And we got general support for the overall framework and what Stefanos was talking about today. Some of these questions I'm going to be asking of this committee in a moment. But we are really hoping to hear whether you support the concept of the 30-foot sidewalks on either side and a 20-foot travel lane area, emergency access area that would be divided up into two 10-foot travel lanes. would like to understand the support or not of retractable bollards and the use of that type of infrastructure to create a more flexible environment. The next question is around supporting the civic and commercial district as the highest priority investment area. And what I mean by that is both if we were only able to invest in one space, whether it be for funding reasons or other reasons, that we really concentrate the most focus on that middle district, which is seen has the most need to really come up to snuff and be that civic space that our downtown has in many ways with the city, with City Hall, De La Guerra Plaza, El Paseo Nuevo, all right there. The Libero Theater is very close by, the post office in the back. There's these amazing civic buildings, but we're not really celebrating them in the public space sense, and so this would be that moment. And then the last question is really the catch-all. Are there other elements that we should explore further? I think what I would ask of this committee when you're thinking about that question in particular is really focusing around how we are dividing up the space from a transportation lens, so looking at the pedestrian and biking and transit scenarios, and would like to get your feedback on that portion of the plan, and if there are other elements that we should be thinking about or things that we should be incorporating into the plan. The sort of timeline, so we are finalizing getting feedback. I wanted to just sort of leave you with this picture at the end, but we are finalizing getting feedback. Staff will be incorporating feedback into the master plan, and then we are planning to come back to council with a final master plan in August of this year. So getting your feedback, I had a question from another commission on, how much feedback to give at this point. I think with a reminder, we're at a high level. We're not talking about the detailing of a bench or the pattern on a pavement at this stage. We'll have that time with this. We'll have that time with the different groups in the future as we go into the engineering and more detailed work. But at a high level, we're wanting to get sort of, does this seem like an approach that the committee feels we could move forward with or not? And then, yes, we'll be going back to council in August, and the hope would be that we would be able to continue after that. So if you have any questions, Stefanos, Miguel, and I are here and more than happy to answer them and get your feedback.
Questions?
Jessica, did you want
Chair Baki, if I could offer a recommendation, could we maybe take the public comment first,
Absolutely.
and then go into, before we answer those questions, which would basically serve as your comments, if there's any clarifying questions that you ask after the public comment?
That's exactly what I was about to say. Let's do public comment and then committee questions. Follow-up questions are fine, but let's try and keep our comments to the comment section of the meeting. I will do that myself as well this time. And then we can have a more a proper dialogue about this important topic. So we'll open it to public comment on this item for members of the community in the room. All right, go right up. And do we have a timer set up?
Yes, I can set up a timer. Okay.
Thank you. My name is Molly Pearson, and I'm a retired air quality professional, but I'm also an avid biker and walker here in the city. So a few things I just wanted to say is State Street, and especially your role here, transportation and circulation. State Street is transportation infrastructure. We're talking about changing this transportation infrastructure, so I would really like you guys to focus on the safety, the allocation of this infrastructure in your comments. And there are things in the plan specifically related to the use of State Street by private vehicles and how this might bring up more conflicts. And I don't know, I know that this is kind of a fluid thing, and the council's probably going to decide, the mayor and council, but I would really encourage you to voice your opinion of whether that's a safe configuration that is in the plan right now that was agendized for you to review. I also am concerned about the central district, focusing on it as a plaza type district. I think it needs circulation still, and there's been a lot of pressure in council meetings and State Street Advisory Committee meetings to cut it off to even bikes. So if you're gonna move bikes off of State Street, even if it's just for a few hours, I would encourage you to consider safe infrastructure outside of State Street. What that would be, I don't know. Your consultant mentioned Chapala and Anacapa, but that's not in the plan. So that's a little vague, whether that is a potential resource that could be exploited for safe infrastructure when State Street is totally closed down. Am I up to my 2 minutes?
You have 30 seconds.
Oh, great. What else? Yeah, so references to Gutierrez and Haley being changed to two-way streets. It's really confusing when we hear this in a presentation, but it's not in the plan. So I think that should be really clarified to the public, whether this is something that's being considered or not. And was there any consideration of like instead of a 30-20-20, maybe a 40-20-20, so that we could still have that access lane available during like farmer's market or something? I think that would be a great thing to hear more about. Thanks a lot.
Hi, Sarah Iannarone. I'm the Executive Director of Move Santa Barbara County. We like people moving. Walking is transportation. Let's not forget that. So is skateboarding, so is rolling, and so are many other modes that are emerging that we can't even imagine yet, that are low carbon and safe. There is a little bit of an e-bike crisis, but I also just want to ground us in the fact that there were over 36,000 traffic deaths last year and about 300 e-bike deaths in the 7 years combined before that, too. One of the things that we have to focus on here, I think, is the feasibility of reintroducing automobile traffic, regardless of the time of day. I can give an example. In Portland, Oregon, they built the first car-free bridge in the modern era about a decade ago. And one of the reasons people thought it was ideological, right? We're going to be this car-free people. No, it's because introducing cars into a system is so expensive. You have to overbuild the infrastructure. You have to add all of these accommodations, even to connect it to the rest of the system. That circulation piece, you have beautiful back doors to state streets from that ample parking. It's literally the back porch with your front porch being for walking and rolling. I also want to stress that for us, the biggest concern, we do believe that the pedestrian realm here is lovely, but for bicyclists at night, I've also lived in New Orleans where Bourbon Street is closed from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. for a very good reason. We are talking about reintroducing potentially car traffic in a place where people drink an awful lot at a time when our service workers who arrive potentially to work by bicycle at 3 in the afternoon in a very safe zone are then coming out of their job on this corridor into a danger zone. And we would be liable for that. I want you to think about that very, very carefully as a city, as a community, if anyone is injured in that corridor after dark. But also, we need to think about the future of this place. And again, I'm kind of new to this, but this doesn't strike me as a downtown. This strikes me as a corridor and a very important one. But our downtown is so much more than this. It goes to the courthouse. It goes to this whole center here. And we want to think about how are we creating a safe area for the people using the various amenities in our central city when they travel here, whether they work here, go to school here, and how can we access this beautiful car-free zone in ways that are safe and commercially friendly, but also make sure that the entire connectivity is pleasant and safe for folks. And I did appreciate many of the retail recommendations, but I will also say that just people not being broke and being able to afford housing is really what stimulates retail. And right now, a lot of people are spending their money on Amazon.com as well. So things like delivery fees we can access to help pay for, the types of outcomes we want. So we're happy to engage you in a positive way, and we hope that we can keep this safe for everybody moving. And I'm really concerned about what happens if people start driving there late at night while bicycles are on the street.
Thank you. And then for any online speakers, please raise your hand if you would like to speak in public comment. Okay, we have no other speakers.
All right, great. Well, I will turn it back to the committee for questions of the project team. Who wants to go first? Conrad, there you go.
I got a couple civil engineering questions. You guys kind of went quickly over the drainage stuff, and I'd like you to go back to that. There seemed to be kind of like a French drain design around those bollards where you're going to be using like gravel media to have the water flow through under the street. Can you elaborate on that a bit more?
I think the drains are on the side of the area, which is the central 20 feet. You can
Okay.
see it in the section. They happen on the edges,
Okay.
and the water percolates from there, and then goes through to the underground. This is an exaggerated,
Okay.
I think 2-to-1 or 3-to-1
My
section.
My question for that is, so anytime we're using like filtered media, French drain, engine filter, anything, eventually they clog. How's that going to be cleaned out? How are you back flushing that? When that thing clogs full of dirt at the surface layer and water's no longer able to get through there, what's the city's plan to blast that out?
I think committee member, that's a great comment. I will be honest, Stefanos and I are not the civil engineer on the team, so I'm not sure I can really answer that question appropriately, but I would say that our sustainability team is working closely as well with the stormwater concept on State Street, and I can bring that question back to them.
My only concern here is like, you don't have gravity on your side for this one. If you start power washing the top of that, you're just going to drive that dirt deeper in that filtered media and just clog it up even more. So I worry that eventually this is going to be a system where now we're excavating just to clean it and get it back to working, pulling out all that rock, placing it back just to clean dirt out of it. Otherwise, like I like the idea of not having the water flow on the surface, but that's a concern. Other question, the bollards, I love bollards. I think that your whole idea of having the agility of that space to transform back and forth, I've been waiting to see that, and I'm glad you guys have it. What's the strength, the shear strength rating on those specifically? Like,
I'm
what
not
can hit them and like
I think
stand?
I don't have the immediate crash rating for you. I can get that for you, but they would be crash rated, from what I recall, definitely for a vehicle up to at least 25, if not 35 miles per hour. I'll look up the specifications.
Okay, like truck or Honda Civic.
It would include a light duty truck, like, an F-150, a larger, SU-30 or box truck would probably be above the weight, but for a typical passenger vehicle or truck, it would be crash rated for that type of vehicle.
Okay, I know this is morbid, but like, we all see the news nowadays, and it'd be really bad for the city to cheap out on skimpy bollards and something like that happen, and then suddenly them go, oh, you picked the cheap bollards. Cool. That lawyer would have a field day with that. Other question on, so your guys' whole design of like leveling the street out, making it feel like a European city, it's beautiful. I love it. I'm curious what you guys are thinking as far as material goes for the pavers. Are you thinking natural stone, or are we thinking concrete that looks like stone?
I think these are fundamental questions that we have to work on, relative to budgets and otherwise. There are systems now of artificial stone as well. We'll have to work with you at the appropriate moment to get those things decided. It could be all of the above. Some of them may be more natural materials where people walk, and maybe artificial systems for the streets. We need to see where we are with the budget. With the next level of design.
Yeah, my thought there, and I love that picture that you have right there where there's a bicyclist able to transit over something, and then there's some rougher ones. Because my concern there is like the ones that are going to be the most visually appealing are the ones that are going to be the highest trip hazard and the worst for bicycles. But they're also going to be the ones that are going to make it feel like an old European city, which is kind of what we've modeled Santa Barbara after, right? Yeah. So that's a hard trade-off right there. So is that something you guys are thinking about?
Absolutely, and
Okay.
I think those are questions that we have to work out down to the millimeter from an accessibility point of view, particularly.
Yeah, and unit cost as far as what you guys use as well. Okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you.
And while on that subject, I'm not a fan of the mixed material types, for the travel areas for bicycles. The difference between the different pavement types is going to create a different experience for the bicycle rider and possibly be dangerous, especially when it's wet, when you have one material having a different coefficient of friction than an adjacent material, and the bicycle rider is going to be going between those two materials, not being prepared for that change. So I'm not a fan of the mixed material type.
Committee member Bickford, could we focus on just questions for the team now and then do our comments after the questions? Or do you have a question following that?
Oh, so comments later?
Yeah, comments after questions, yes.
Got it.
Any questions?
No.
No? Okay. Do y'all want to respond to that as if it was a question?
I'm happy to start responding, and then Miguel or Stefanos can join as well. You know, I think I certainly understand that comment, and I think we are trying to figure out how to best differentiate the space when we need to have 20 feet free and clear from an emergency access standpoint. So no matter what, we are going to have 20 feet of space. In our minds, using that space by dividing it up into two separate travel lanes that could be used for various modes, including cycling or transit, provides sort of all of it within that 20 feet of space, rather than having to eat up additional square feet on the pedestrian area. At the same time, if we left 20 feet of space purely open to bicycles, I think there is the concern that, or the perception that people are experiencing now in some areas on State Street where bicycles have a lot more space and it doesn't feel like a more pedestrian-oriented environment. So we are trying to use pavement to sort of differentiate the bike lane as having really 5 feet of pavement that is pretty, like a concrete paver, and then something with some texture on the side so that the cyclists really stay well within that 5 feet of space and have a little bit of separation from the either transit or cyclists that are going in the opposite direction. So that was the intention behind the design idea. I think if the committee has thoughts on, how we address that in a different way, we certainly would take those comments.
I would also add that this is an important direction for us. I mean, this is a classic design question, that the materials need to be relatively compatible in every way, including in slippage. So that's noted. And what kind of, not all concrete is the same, of course, and not all stones are the same, and not only all artificial materials are the same. And so this will have to come in front of you and address that question at an appropriate time.
Committee member Blackerby? Or Rodriguez?
I really want to focus on questions and not make any comments about how I feel about your program. Doesn't mean I don't have feelings. But this is so much material, and it's so important. And I don't understand where you're going to maybe put the bollards. We talked about bollards. There's one picture of black bollards all along to protect pedestrians. Then there was discussion of bollards that come up and down at intersections. And so I don't understand. I can't picture it. And I don't want to talk about something I don't understand.
Well, I think that questions came up in our previous meetings, and we've tried already to respond to them in this diagram, because in the past, in the first iteration, we thought that pedestrians crossing at the bike, you can see can you see the sidewalks going right to left in north to south continuously? People walking across may have to be protected from bicyclists, but they also have to be protected potentially from cars that take maybe some strange right turn on this. And if we provide enough space for them, that is up to about 15 or 18 feet, they might be tempted to go in there and drop somebody off, and then they would be of danger to both bicyclists and pedestrians. So we decided in this version to move the bollards out, to move them out towards the center of the intersection. And this is where this red bollards are the movable bollards. The blue are the are the fixed bollards, and that's actually just a reminder at this point of how we're going to be able to contain the possibility of vehicles coming in from the sides into the space in the mode of the street where there's the street is closed to vehicles, and the circle is really an intention. It's the first intention for a planter, which is also a banco, and that which takes at least either in every intersection or the intersection transition from one area to another, one district to another, that can define that kind of change in the uses and in the nature of these districts, but also provide an extra important level of security.
That helps me understand it a lot better. And then the second question I have is, I'm not sure about curbs or not curb. I mean, there's one, at the back of the presentation, you have even a new model that has a curb, and then we're talking about having it all be flat and
We are
having
not talking about
everything-
having it flat. I think the flat idea is not viable for two reasons.
Okay, that
Yeah.
wasn't clear to me. Thank you.
Yeah. The most profound reason is the question of the flow of the water. It has to be continuous. And so it has to be a concave section, and the water can both flow and be absorbed evenly as one goes and was going through.
If it's engineered to be concave, can you eliminate curbs? Or do you have to have a curb?
You want to eliminate the curbs because you don't want a curbless environment is going to have just a riot of fixed bollards up and down to keep people that are moving in all modes, including bicycles, from entering the space of the pedestrians.
So you're saying that that's preferred, to have the permanent bollards down the,
No, it is not. It is not preferred because it becomes an environment full of bollards, and
Okay.
you want the openness and the relative permeability right to left as you're walking,
Okay.
and this environment.
so there's going to be a need for some curbs.
Yes, and they're rolled curbs they're not rising curbs. They're rolled curbs.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you. It was very unclear to me. I appreciate it.
Committee Member Rodriguez, just on that cross-section, just for visualization. So again, there's the two 10-foot travel lanes, where you'll see the gradual curb. Again, this is just at the concept level. Yes, is in that sort of
Got it.
5-foot delta, is
Thank
where
you.
you would have a roll in the curb.
Thank you very much. I think that's it.
Go ahead.
Questions. Are you, I was like hunting for it in the what's the term? Well, I mean, elevations, but also in the, mock-ups of what it would look like with people in the new conditions. Is there, and maybe you can point it out for me, or maybe it doesn't exist yet, elevations that show the transit stop part? Because we can see that sort of plan view of, well, there's a little, carve out, but does that exist?
Committee Member Blackerby, it does not exist yet. So we have the perspectives that show the sidewalk, but we don't have one that shows the transit stop. I think it could be something that, working with the team, that maybe that's something we could add into the plan.
And then one thing that I'm curious about, well, two things. We're thinking about this, it seems like in a very linear, or presenting it in a linear fashion about State Street, but cross streets. I'm just wondering, and it's mentioned some, but no matter what you let on the street, right, like, there's gonna be cars crossing it at each intersection essentially. So I'm curious what thought has gone into that as far as treatments at those intersections, aside from bollards to keep people from turning on, but anything to slow that traffic down or to adjust that in some way?
Yes, Committee Member Blackerby, we've had some discussion about curb extensions at the intersections to try to really narrow some of that vehicle traffic that's coming through the State Street crossings. So I think that's something you will see in the plan. The other sort of more artistic element, but also I think it signalizes you're coming into a different area. One of the slides showed an example of sort of like a tile design that we are anticipating. And I don't know what the design will be at this stage, but doing some kind of artistic treatment at each of the intersections along State Street to really signalize in a permanent, like in a pavement texture way, but to signalize that you're in a different zone or in a different space.
If we could return to one of the plans, I think the principal idea there is that at the intersection, that's not an intersection drawing. Maybe in the smaller plans, and that's not very well drawn either. But well, it is drawn some. But the idea would be that the finish of the ground of the central portion is going to go through north-south in high detail, which basically means that the east-west is going to be interfering or being interfered with by overlapping or crossing over what is essentially a pedestrian area on the surface and probably in a variety of ways. For instance, if you have these trees, reducing your perspective, you would immediately feel that you're intersecting a pedestrian area.
Okay.
And there are probably many more of the things that we could do design-wise in extending that idea, in further articulating that idea.
Right, thank you. And then my last question is, and this goes back further than 6 months when you've come on, and I know, Miguel, you've been around on the project for longer, but I guess for Tess, what input or even like sort of say have the city's fabulous cadre of public works engineers had in this? I say that because I know at the end of the day, you guys are leaving, right?
We're not going anywhere.
When this contract's over, they're going to stop paying you and you're going to go away. And so, but the people whose like job it is to keep us safe, I'm curious, like what input have they had? And do you feel like there's a path where can get, I mean, I guess it's a question for them, but where they can get comfortable with what's proposed when knowing that like a lot of these decisions are made based on financial or political or aesthetic, reasons. And so I'm just curious what that input has been or will be as you move towards a final plan.
Sure. Committee Member Blackerby, I can start to answer, and then maybe Ms. Grant, or I know that Derek Bailey is in the audience as well if he wants to answer too. I think, this project has seen many different iterations and has been challenging for lots of different reasons, and I think has been a less than perfect process. And at the same time, I do think that not just in the last 6 months, but I think in particular, in the more recent years, but throughout, there's been conversations with the Public Works team, and I struggled with, and the team in general, with like, how do we make all of the different pieces work in this confined space? I do think that we've gotten to a design where the team in general feels comfortable. We've had conversations with the Public Works staff about this particular design and sort of whiteboarded different ideas and concepts through. There's a lot more work that will need to be done, and certainly the Public Works team will be heavily involved when it comes to the detailed engineering and final design elements. But I think in terms of the high-level piece that you're seeing today, I do think that the full team is on board.
I'll just add on behalf of Public Works is, yes, Ms. Harris has a extremely difficult job. There are so many stakeholders, both internal to the city and then, of course, the larger stakeholders and our from the everyday resident to all different, all of our committees and boards and all the different interests and really that's summarized in the visions and goals. At this point, again, we're trying to get the concept of the plan through. I would say with a lot of the discussion internally is just what we, in years and years of capital planning work are sort of what the red flags are, and this through the lens of construction and design. But again, we're one piece of a very large puzzle on this. But if if this plan is approved by city council, then it does become into a, trying to seek funds for the next phase that Ms. Harris outlined. And then that's when the interactions, all the nitty-gritty details, committee member Metzenberg's questions on those drainage, like that's when we have the very in-depth conversations on those.
I want to add one small thing to your points, and that was that we have met with Public Works. We've met with a lot of the professionals on the technical side in the city. They're enormously competent, and they were very, very friendly and very helpful in many ways. And there was general agreement on certain principles that had to do with the section that we discussed. That's why it's in front of you. Where there wasn't any agreement, and it's very clear, had to do with the question of the two-way, the one-way street conversion, when we're not actually advocating and we're not suggesting that it be done. We're suggesting that it be studied. And I think that's a fundamental misunderstanding that has arisen, I think, among various commissions. It is essential nonetheless, but it's more complex than the question of how it affects State Street, because it affects many more things, right? And so that is why it has to be really seen separately and deliberately and decided, and hopefully it could be proven that it would benefit the evolution of the street as we think it may.
Thank you. Actually, I had one more question. There was a slide where it mentioned a property management ordinance. What is that? It sounds like something I would like, but what is it?
Yes, so it may have been a typo. It should say property maintenance ordinance, but we are looking, okay. Let me see if I can pull it up. Give me one moment. Yeah. So we are looking at, there's been many discussions at the city around property maintenance and vacancies on the street, and there are properties that are not well maintained on State Street and sit with graffiti or sit without a tenant for months or years at a time. This would put requirements on the property owner to really maintain their property more appropriately. It wouldn't be a vacancy tax, but it would be something that has some teeth to require property owners to maintain their property.
Great, thank you.
Is that all? All right.
I just have one last quick
Sure.
one last quick question. The 20-foot width for emergency vehicles, what can you educate me about what the details on that are? Like,
Sure. So there's a requirement in our fire code and actually I see Miguel, who is much more qualified to answer it. But it is a requirement from our fire code that that we have 20 feet for commercial streets. And I'll pass it over to Miguel.
Sure. Basically, what that 20 feet is intended to do is to provide space for a vehicle to get through. If it's narrower, the concern is that if vehicles pull over, they might pull over in a way that still would not allow a large fire vehicle to get through. Based on the code and discussions with fire, that 20 feet is deemed sufficient based on the fire code to address that concern, and that's why it's a 20-foot minimum.
okay, so I guess what immediately comes to mind is you actually have 26 feet. Why can't why can't you bring that in?
This gets into a bit of a distinction of the fire code. The minimum is 20 feet. Portions of the fire code actually have to do with heights of buildings, because there are some buildings on portions of State Street that are in excess of 35 feet. That raises that minimum width to 26 feet. So this is intended to provide the flexibility to provide that minimum, whether it's 20 or 26 feet, based on the height of the adjacent buildings. Yeah, and the roll, and it's the rolled curb that allows that extra width to be considered, but that is the
So
reason
you're
why.
already counting it, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
It's hard to see over. Okay, I am on. So I saw the phasing plan, phase 1, 2, and 3. For construction, what's that maybe, I think, gonna look like seasonally? I mean, I imagine we're gonna want to ideally avoid construction during the peak, tourist times, but also I don't imagine we're gonna install a stormwater system in January. So, like, what's the seasonal construction look like?
Yes, committee member. You know, honestly, those details still would need to be worked out as we're getting into the more detailed construction and design phase. There have been some other projects throughout the country that I've been following that are doing. Denver's one that did 16th Street in the last couple years, and they did a phased approach for their construction. And so I do think we would do something similar. So we might take a district and then do a segment of a block at a time and shift from one to the other. We've talked about, there has been some debate within the city about whether we are starting up in the arts district or down in the entertainment district and working up, or whether we're starting in the middle and shifting out. From a stormwater standpoint, to connect to the infrastructure, it likely makes sense to start from one side or the other. And there's sort of a little bit of still that is a question that that I think our team needs to resolve on which side would start first. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'll have a more detailed response for you on that question.
Okay, thank you. On landscaping, it seems like in a lot of the mock-ups, so State Street has lots and lots of, there's the tree canopy that you can see going all the way down, but there's also lots of low planters that have low shrubs, and sometimes it's just like a hedge or something. And it looks like a lot of that is getting, and I think the issue it's causing is if you were to expand the pedestrian area out in the middle, and this definitely happens on the 500 block with kind of the boardwalk pieces, is you're sort of pushing pedestrians into two lanes on either side of a planter that doesn't really feel like you can walk everywhere, doesn't feel like this big open pedestrian space, feels like you're either on like the slow path at the airport or the fast path at the airport. And so, it looks like some of your plans kind of do away with some of those planters. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. I think it's a very important question that you're asking. I think that that planting is in place because by taking away, 60 years ago, by taking away the parking, what happened is you had cars going at 30 miles, 40 miles an hour without any protection for the pedestrians whatsoever. Mm-hmm. And I think these, in many instances, are put into place, not everywhere, but in enough intervals that they begin to instruct the cars to really slow down. And so, having grown, of course, also over time, they have put in place a situation where as you're walking up and down a sidewalk on one side of the street, you can barely cross on the other, sometimes for half a block. Yeah. And so in order to reconceive of this as an entirely open landscape wall to wall, I think some of those things might have to be removed. They might have to be replanted. They might be replanted in more modest ways because we don't want to make the whole thing a hardscape in the European example of this kind of plaza making. There ought to be really serious landscape in place, but it has to be considered in a much more contained way. And so that is also a situation where when it comes to the design block to block, we should be, someday, soon, we should be able to talk about those things in great detail. Is that too much? Is that too little? Where is the art? Where are the bankers? Why are they? All those kinds of questions are part of this kind of bigger design consideration at the detailed level. But it's a very, very important point. And there are also some, today I was working with Tess up and down. This happens every time we come. We just keep looking. There were an awful lot of people on the street today, many, many people. It was very encouraging at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 1:45, something like that. And so as we're walking, there are certain places where there are very big stone planters with beautiful jacarandas in them. Well, something like that probably should never be taken down. So there are some aspects of this, And this is a really beautiful question of design. How much of the existing landscape should stay and how much of it should be taken out? It's a real question. Many trees are not doing well. Many trees are at the end of their lives. There are many dead trees and dead shrubs. So there's questions of renewal. We have a very extensive, I think you have the landscape commons. Our landscape architect has gone tree by tree, and I think we have a very good idea here. Yeah, right. We have a very good idea of where they are and how they are, and there's a whole evaluation of the system of trees. And as I said before, what is going to be exceptional about this, which has to do with your comment as well, is that when you remove a lot of these barriers, you're going to end up with a landscape in which the sidewalks are going to be extremely unusual in that the landscape is going to be in the middle of them, as opposed to on the side of where the movement is happening day and night by different modes. It's going to be a very distinctive place because of it.
Thank you. I guess this is a question for staff. So this references using ATP funding. What's the timeline? Is that something that would need to be maybe part of our October meeting about how would we get something on the ATP application schedule, and how soon could that happen?
Committee members, so we had gotten council direction when we went to bring the other ATP projects forward to also submit an application for State Street. So we did submit an ATP application for State Street by the June 22nd, by Monday this week, by the deadline for the construction, engineering, and environmental review work.
Oh, perfect.
So, our hope would be that in the fall, when it'd be great to be awarded, that would be ideal. And we'll find out in December. And then, if not, there are other opportunities. But even if we are awarded, the hope is also that we could go back for the construction work as well.
Okay. Next question is, so a lot of this focuses on the civic zone or civic and commercial district, which really I would say the main element of that area is De La Guerra Plaza, which has its own revitalization proposal and project, and it feels very odd to try and consider revamping this civic and this district without talking about De La Guerra Plaza. So, and I don't want to say we can slow everything down by doing them all together, but can you at least give an update on what the status of that is?
Yes, committee member, I can. So we actually did pause the De La Guerra revitalization project a little bit. It had been moving faster than the State Street Master Plan for a while, and then the State Street Master Plan really kind of caught up to it as it was in sort of concept with the Historic Landmarks Commission. And at that time, staff, we felt strongly that the projects really needed to start really kind of speaking the same design language, and in many ways they already do, but there are some elements that just because the De La Guerra project had the concept design had been done much before this project. Now that we have a better understanding of what we are going to be doing with State Street, assuming it moves forward, I think then we would start to bring the De La Guerra revitalization project sort of back into the forefront of the conversation. But really thinking of both of those as kind of pieces of the city center, town center element. And so I think you'll hear more about De La Guerra Plaza, but it has been on hold so that this project can move forward.
I think there were a couple of design issues in the central portion that were discussed during the last 6 months, were put aside because they were really essentially outside the scope of working on the street itself, which I think is unfortunate, but it is what it is, so we have to accept it under the circumstances. But it's not only De La Guerra Plaza itself, it's how De La Guerra Plaza connects to State Street. There might be another paseo, another opening that could be opened on the essential middle block, south of De La Guerra Street. It is possible, I think, also. I mean, we talked about this and we took it out of our ongoing deliberations because it's stepped beyond our scope. But there is no doubt about the fact that the old Paseo, the Paseo Viejo, is really one of the most important architectural ensembles in California, if not the country. It's really an essential set of monuments and places, and there's an enormous amount of empty land around there that is really a shame. The old Paseo in itself is in a deteriorated state. Well, it's not so much deteriorated, it's underused state, I would say. And then there is parking lots, there is the Press News building, there is the Press News parking lot, there is all kinds of things that could be considered as a 1925 level redevelopment project that could really pull all of that together to strengthen the heart of the city, along with the recent developments of the Paseo Nuevo, and actually, that'll be one of the fundamental parts, I think, along with the Reguela Plaza, to establishing the old core as a destination, and a destination we communicated, throughout our region, the Southern California region, as being a place worth going to, worth visiting, worthwhile from a variety of perspectives, for families, for weekends, for whatever, for all these reasons that bring people to place. And I want to also point out one thing, if I may, in this respect, and that is that the expense of building this particular project, as opposed to building other civic projects, needs to be clarified as being not only an expense, but also an investment. Many civic projects are actually infrastructural projects that we, take a big hole and we put all the money in it and we cover it. It does an essential and extraordinary job, but we never see it again. But this is the kind of project that, if it's properly done, it becomes really the kind of investment that can generate tax income that can be fundamental not only to the downtown, but to the whole city. And I think that's something to be thinking about as one considers the implementation dimensions of the project.
Awesome. Thank you. Two more questions, really quick. And I think this goes back to what Conrad was showing about the engineering cross-section for the stormwater plan. And I think this should just be a pretty quick, I just want to make sure I'm understanding this right, is that where a typical street kind of hills in the middle and slants down towards the gutters, this one points and directs water towards the center. Okay, great. And I think, I had a question about private vehicles, but I think it's really an opinion as a question, so I'll hold off.
There is also, this is actually an in the weeds detail, but I think you should know about it as well. There's a lot of water coming out from the roofs of buildings and coming out into the street. And that needs to be accommodated in a way that can only be done if you have a curb as opposed to having a completely flat place, right? It has to go under the sidewalk and into the drains underground, which bears an even better answer to your question at the appropriate moment.
All right, further questions before I go? Committee Member Rodriguez.
I got one more that I thought of. This might be opening Pandora's box, so if you can tell me that you'll answer it later, but in two of your illustrations at least, there's a little vehicle, a little tram going on, and then there's bikes behind it, and then on the other side there's bikes. What happens when the bike people want to pass the tram, or, it doesn't look
They're
like.
sharing the right-of-way, and they have to be respectful of each other and accommodate one the other and go from there. That's absolutely common in the way in which
Really?
rights-of-ways of streets are used, right? And probably they're very close to the same speeds. Maybe the transit's going a little faster than the bikes. And then within a very short distance, maybe half a block, the transit sticks to the right and lets people off, and the bikes pass.
Oh, okay, that helps me see it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I think I don't know how to do this best. Maybe through some kind, in the long run, with some kind of modeling that shows, what this numbers of bikes and this schedule of transit vehicles, and probably even at night, how many bikes and how many cars might actually be using this place I think that is an important thing to be able to visualize, I think.
Well, there's so much technical ability in the world today that it might be really cool if you could do a video of how it would be on the street, more daytime or nighttime. I really think that would help.
All right, any further questions? All right, I'll go, and I'll just preface my questions by saying I know this is going to be numerous, so feel free to give me the short answer. I've been following this process since, 2021 when they started, so I've been waiting for this for a while, so please forgive me in advance. My first one is kind of just a sort of branding question. We've heard Promenade, we've heard Grand Paseo, State Street. Have we landed on what we want to call this, or is that a TBD? Let's ask folks what it looks like after we build it.
So that is a great question. So we are really starting to call it the State Street Paseo, actually. That was in the draft master plan, and that was sort of the Grand Paseo was, at one point, it just didn't feel like it quite stuck. I think the Promenade is another one that is great, but also signalizes that it perhaps doesn't have multi-mode to it. And so we've sort of tossed a few different ones. I'll say for the ATP grant, we titled it State Street Paseo. We could change, that title could change, but as of this week, that's sort of what we have been thinking about for the branding.
Okay, great. Just curious about that. Let's see here. I want to talk about, I guess I'll just start with the rolled curb piece. To be honest, I remain a little skeptical about a couple aspects to it, and I understand the hydraulic capacity being kind of the foremost rationale for it. But, throughout the presentation, there are a lot of slides of flat streets in the United States, in Europe, in places that it rains more, where they have more development on the street than we do. Clematis, Florida, I think, is in the slides repeatedly, and it's in South Florida. They get tons of rain. So I guess I'm just curious. I understand that it might be more hydraulic capacity if you have a curb and the rain goes down the middle, obviously. But is it truly infeasible for us to do something flat and still meet our stormwater needs? How are these other communities able to pull it off?
Chair Balke, it's not infeasible, but it is more challenging.
Okay.
I think the other piece to it, there are just elements that we felt like with the mix of modes in the location, with transit sort of loading and unloading, there is a benefit to having a curb for that user getting on and off transit. And also from the standpoint of, just being able to understand that you're moving from a pedestrian-oriented zone into an area that may have vehicles or may have bikes. We felt that the curb really gave you that indication. But yes, it is possible to do it as a flat street. It just isn't the design direction that we're recommending at this time.
Okay. And there are many reasons to be unhappy about the prevalence of 499 fixed bollards on either side of 9 blocks. But the most important one is that, as you can see in that perspective we showed you, that once you put these bollards up, the north-south, formal direction of the space becomes more prevalent and more important than the right to left, the up and down. So the thing becomes more of a street that way and less of a plaza. I mean, that's actually, it's almost counterintuitive in certain ways, but that's the case.
Okay. And I guess a follow-up clarifying, is it actually code or law that we would have to have bollards separating a flat street? Because, I went to, Japan and I've been in Europe, where it's ubiquitous, where you have traffic, two-way traffic, and there's no separation
In
whatsoever.
Europe, Japan, they don't have any lawyers, sorry.
Right. Well, I figure that's part of the answer. But in these other cities as well, like Clematis and in the United States, is it a California thing, or is it just a general recommendation if we're going to have, forgetting cars, put that aside, if we're going to have a little shuttle and e-bikes, would it really need to be fixed bollards on a flat street, or could it be planters? Could it be pavement differentiation?
Chair Bauke, I can start, and then I'm going to pass it off to Mr. Nunez. Could be something like planters and not bollards. We could change that configuration, even with the fixed bollards that we are proposing at the intersections. We say there, the retractable bollards would be the bollards that we are showing. The fixed bollards could be fixed actual bollards, or they could be planters or other elements. So yes, we could change that if we had the flat street on that side. I don't know that there's a code requirement for it, but there certainly is a desire, especially when you're when you have just different modes to separate that space a little bit more.
Yeah. Similarly, I'm not certain if it is a code requirement. Irrespective of that, the main consideration thus far has been safety. Committee member Metzenberg mentioned some incidents that have happened. Some of those have been intentional, some of those have been accidental, but they have resulted in some injury and death that a barrier, whether a bollard or a planter, would help avoid. So it doesn't have to be a bollard per se, as Ms. Harris was saying, but there is a desire for a barrier for safety reasons.
Can I say one more thing? Just in continuation of the explanation, I think the larger the volume of the barrier, the more the intensity of the designation of the corridor as a line. So I think a very slender element of any kind would be preferable to a planter that's this size and this tall.
I would tend to agree with that. I guess one of my questions was, we have some rolled curbs downtown already. There's one at the end where De La Guerra ends and becomes Paseo Nuevo. That's quite large, quite tall. But then there's a more narrow rolled curb where you go from the library garage into the back entrance of the library and Library Plaza. Are those the same size, or what is envisioned in that scale? Is this a smaller, more flat?
Yes, Chair Bauke, we are talking about a 4-inch rolled curb. So the curb, like a traditional curb that you see, is typically at least 6 inches. When you were talking about the rolled curb at Paseo Nuevo, that is a larger rolled curb than what we are proposing.
Okay. And would these be smaller or larger than the ones in the library, or TBD? You can get back.
I am not certain, and to be honest, I don't have that one in my head as well as the Paseo rolled curb.
That's all good.
And as Ms. Harris mentioned earlier, we're not in the weeds of the design details. That is something that we will need to get in the weeds at some point. It's just more conceptually, right now, of a rolled curb. In those, to differentiate the pedestrian area versus the travel lanes.
And so I guess my last question on the curb is, so you all are confident then that a small rolled curb, which is my preference, is sufficient for the safety considerations, right? People do make their way up the 6-inch curbs still too. So how are we going to?
Chair Bauke, that's a hard question to answer, because I don't know that I could ever say that something is 100% safe, right? People do things all the time that are not safe, and but I do think the intention behind the idea behind it would provide that separation enough to differentiate the space. That's been the design team's feeling throughout. Certainly, as we're getting into the engineering work, there's going to be more analysis there to help with that.
And also, to be clear, the rolled curb that we're talking about, it was within the Paseo proper, at the intersections, you would be at your standard, curbs with the curb extensions and all of that.
None of these questions are going to go away. None of them. None of the questions being asked tonight by you all are going to go away.
Fair
They're
enough.
going to be revisited, yes.
Okay, and then I guess I'll move on to the intersections, similar kind of theme and questions about, stormwater considerations versus, the safety if there's cars involved, and there obviously are cars involved going through the cross streets no matter what. So I understand from your prior comments that you've made at other meetings and presentations that, there was kind of that floated, through the SSAC process, the idea of the NACTO recommended flat intersections as an idea. I understand that wasn't ever like really finally decided. But so you're recommending that we don't do raised intersections. I guess could you explain why not if, you know?
Sure, Chair Bauke, I can start and then I'll pass it to Stefanos. You know, it's something the team is still looking at, but as we've been looking at it so far, the feeling is that raising the intersections on State Street may cause some stormwater challenges and may not have enough benefit. There just is a trade-off. Right. Which do we want to have? And the street the intersections carry vehicle traffic, but if we don't have as much vehicle traffic on State Street, we are not going to have a significant amount of vehicle traffic in those intersections themselves, different from a 4-lane or a large intersection where often raised intersections can happen anywhere, but they often happen in a larger street or a more dense area. And so we just didn't feel like that trade-off was necessarily the right approach for this design.
And there's some questions about whether raised intersections also would be acceptable for emergency vehicles in terms of the response time and going up and down constantly. I think that would be an issue as well. I mean, it's not resolved at that level, but it was brought up.
Okay. I mean, that would be a question I would have,
Yeah.
is what if they have a firm view of that or if they are flexible. I'll move on, though, to so if this design scheme has been built in a way that could accommodate general private vehicle traffic, I assume to a certain degree, if you have emergency traffic, if you have delivery traffic, even if you say those are the only kinds of traffic, you still would have to design for some kind of traffic, right? So is it fair to say that if you had from the beginning had a directive that we're not going to let general private traffic on the street, that the design would still be more or less what it is?
Chair Bauke, yes, that's correct, because we would still need to have the emergency access area, the 20 feet of access, and it would still need to generally be pretty straight, at least in consultation with our public safety staff. So I really don't think that the design would change much, if at all.
Okay.
And the signalization is in place. I mean, it's all there.
Right. Okay. So with that in mind, then, why not do the same treatment on the 400 and 1300 blocks? I understand there are emergency public safety considerations as to why they were never closed in the first place, right, with Haley and Gutierrez. But so if this could accommodate general traffic and there's a decision made that 400 block will always have it for whatever reason, why not do the same treatment?
Because I have learned as a professional that I can argue with my planning colleagues, with my transportation colleagues, any other colleague except for policemen and firemen or women. And when they say we need this and we want it and it's going to happen, that's the end of the argument. It's like your father and mother say, you're not going out tonight, you know? It's that kind of argument. I'm sorry to say, or I'm happy to say. That's the way it is. They said they needed in order to get, they didn't say arbitrarily they want to do it. I'm joking, of course, but they said they needed for access to the beach.
Right.
There's only 3 or 4 points, and they need it, except if all of these places are turned into two-way, at which point there would be another way of accessing the beach, and it'll be okay with them. But in the meantime, they just want to make sure that this happens. And essentially what they're saying is bringing the street from the beach up one more block to the 500 block and on from there.
And Chair Bauke, also, I want to just also point, the 400 block will have some changes to it. So and same with the 1300. We're not saying that we aren't going to change those blocks. They will have some expanded sidewalk to them and changes in pavement and landscaping to kind of align with the entertainment and arts districts. They also will need a right turn lane, right? The 400 block will still need to maintain a right turn lane for vehicles to turn off of State Street and.
Okay, so that actually
So
kind of
that-
answers
that
it
is
more
a
for me,
piece there.
because I will be honest, I found the first part of the answer a little confusing because theoretically this does accommodate vehicle access on every block as it's designed, right? So, or emergency access. So is that kind of the reason the 400 block is different and 1300 block has the other Arlington Way.
That
Are
is
those
one,
why?
that is one large piece, and there was a strong desire from public safety staff to have a larger access way on the 400 block in particular
Okay.
to get to the waterfront.
And I think the actual section of that part of the city, which we have not designed in final form yet, is actually alternative one, which had 2 lanes and also bike lanes on the side, right? Which essentially you would get 20 plus at least 14 more, like 34 feet of whatever the material that pavement is, subject to the possible change of the configuration of the 2 streets, Haley and Gutierrez.
Gotcha. All right. I'll move on from that. So this is kind of a processy question, but I kind of remember that when the SSAC was developed, and the original meetings, that there was kind of a understanding that Anacapa and Chapala would be incorporated as part of the plan. Was that kind of scaled back at a certain point, or is it just part of the contract that we have?
Chair Bauke, it was scaled back a bit. We had the original consulting team did look at Anacapa and Chapala in more detail, and that work emphasized that really we felt like we were still going to maintain a bike network on State Street. That wasn't going to change. And then just sort of the recognition of we want to make sure we get the State Street piece right and really emphasize that piece. And it started to become more complicated as we're pulling in Anacapa and Chapala. So I think those are streets that, as Stefanos was mentioning, there are considerations and more study that could be had for those streets. But we are recommending that occur as a different and subsequent project to this one.
And would we say the same thing for the cross streets?
Chair Bauke, for the most part, yes, but the cross streets are in the draft plan in the sense of parking is going to change on many of those cross streets. The actual the cross streets will remain to have vehicle traffic on them, and there could be an opportunity in the plan. There's talk about Anapamu from the library to State Street as the sidewalk expanding a little bit further, but that is also something that would need to be designed in more detail.
Gotcha. All right, great. Only just a couple more. So a comment was made in the presentation about the southern blocks being weaker than the northern blocks. I'm kind of curious to hear more about that, because I feel like I've
what
heard
was the adjective? Weaker?
like performing weaker, and I've heard almost the opposite.
I think that comment wasn't actually, I think that wasn't intended to be that way. I think the intention behind that comment was that the parking infrastructure is weaker in the bottom really 6 blocks. Once you just past Ortega down to the undercrossing has far less parking stalls.
Okay, great. And then just a couple last process questions. De La Guerra Plaza, you got that. Thank you. So the plan at this point, based off council direction, no longer is hinging off of or recommends the overnight vehicle access, right? Is it fair to say, like, today that's not part of what we're talking about, or should we still opine on that?
Chair Bauke, at the direction of council, we've taken out the hours of operation. We did, staff and the consulting team did recommend hours of operation in the draft plan, and I think this plan can work whether those hours exist or whether those hours change and become something different. I don't think what council was saying is that there will never be hours of operation. I think from that conversation, what I gathered was that conversation was going to happen separate from the master plan itself.
Okay, fair enough. And then just the last kind of infrastructure design question is, I keep hearing about, if we do have cars, that they'll be going 20 miles an hour, and, the previous version of the street that we had that had cars was quite narrow relative to everything else in the city. And still there were incidents even at lower speed. So just what is it about this design that we think will be, if it did have a lot of traffic, a lot of, there was no prohibition, let's just say hypothetically, what about this design makes us confident that it'll be superior to the prior version with the same amount of lanes and all
Well,
the
I mean, I will answer in part, and then you should also answer that question, please, Miguel. I would say that the lanes are limited, the materials on the street are limited, the radii of this the intersections are limited. There is all kinds of interference of all kinds of elements against the street that would have to make people much more careful about how they drive. You know, I mean, and most of the driving really needs to happen off hours. That's the whole issue with the flex scheme is it accommodates the multi-mobility, it accommodates the needs of the retail, particularly the construction and service needs and garbage needs and so on, and there has to be some balance in a scheme like this, but doing it one way or the other, you know, does not resolve the four categories of intentions that were set up as objectives in the beginning of the process. And the only thing it does is the accommodation to some significant degree of all of these elements in a flex scheme. So do you want to address the question of speed and volume on this?
Thank you, Chair Bakke, for the question. As Ms. Harris said, it's very hard to predict. And so what we do is we try to plan based on information, data, contextual factors. State Street, before, I have some information here, I'm just trying to pull it up. Prior to COVID, the volumes on State, Anacapa, and Chapala were generally in the about 6,000 to 11,000 daily vehicle range, which would these days suggest having a protected facility, which was not a thing when State Street, the prior iteration of State Street, was developed. So it had a typical bike lane. And from my observation, I happened to work on the 2014 bike plan, and for this effort, went back and watched some video we had of the corridor. And while it was multimodal, the bike lanes were often used for pickup and drop-off because there was extra space. They were also often used for service and deliveries, which perhaps created a less organized area with higher volumes and higher speeds than what we would see with the proposed project. If the vehicles were to be allowed overnight, the proportion of that daily traffic that would occur is likely to be, I would estimate, 1,000 to 2,000 vehicles, which is within the realm of what FHWA, the Federal Highway Administration, would deem appropriate for a shared facility. There are, of course, trade-offs. Some folks are not comfortable in a shared facility under any context. There are some who are comfortable using it when it's low speed and low volume, like we anticipate State Street would be at night. So for those reasons, the contextual factors and the design, we feel like this cross-section and configuration would offer similar, if not more, safety.
Gotcha. Well, thank you. I appreciate the answer. And then my last question is just about the appendices that are attached to the document. You know, they're quite all over the place in terms of the content that they're focused on. So, you know, say that we were to full-throatedly endorse the plan as presented, are we also endorsing the items in the appendices? Are they live, you know, parts of the plan, or are they kind of just other things to look at of how we got here?
Chair Bakke, you would also be endorsing the appendices. One of the comments, and I think it was a really good one from another committee, was making sure that we're better referencing which appendix we are talking about in the plan, and just sort of how this unfolded. At least the first half of the appendices that are there are the consultant work. So the work from Mullen Palazoides is in Appendix A. There's a technical report that Miguel and the Fair and Piers team did, as well as the other technical reports behind Appendix A. The master plan document itself is really kind of the overall summary document of the entire process, including the design elements, and that was done by staff. So as we go from draft to final, there'll be more incorporation of some of those things. There's a lot of economic data in the appendices as well, and we felt like that was important to include, and that is perhaps more reference than anything else, but understanding what sales tax looks like for the last 10 years. And I think one of our economic consultant from previously that also has been working with the city on Paseo Nuevo had some really great recommendations in their analysis that's also attached as a report. There's a retail report and an economic conditions report in there. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I would think of it as all one. And really the plan document is the plan, but the appendices are intended to support the plan.
Gotcha. So the reason I asked the question is actually specifically about kind of the short-term implementation stuff that's attached in Appendix I, and then also I think it's whatever the last appendix is about the parade policies. You know, I'm just considering, you know, we have an item on Tuesday at council about the short-term plan that, is it, I don't know, like, is the, you know, the short-term action items about establishing travel lanes and delineators and signage, vehicle protection barriers, you know, that seems to be a bit incongruous with where we are. So are those still
I
part of it?
understand the
Yeah,
question now, Chair
yeah,
Bauke.
yeah.
Yeah, those two appendices probably are going to change. I'm not sure how we'll call them as like advisory documents or something, but the parade parameters and the short-term implementation plan piece are not really the bread and butter of the master plan, but I do want to make sure the technical reports that were done by the team still are considered as part of the master plan.
Okay, great. Well, I'm satisfied by that, totally. All right, any other questions from anyone else that have come up? Okay. I'm going to suggest that we maybe take our break now, and before we get back to comments, if that's all right with everybody, maybe 5 minutes.
I think,
or-
yeah, maybe, just a 5-minute health break, and then Chair Baki and team, I think we could handle the first, or each question individually for the first three. I can repeat this, that we maybe take some poll votes and then save the last question for the longer comments.
All right, well, let's get back here at, let's say 8:04. All right, thank you. to order here, and so we're going to go on to our comments. Thank you, staff, for the kind of the guiding pieces of discussion of the questions you want us to answer. So yeah, I'm going to take Ms. Grant's suggestion that we kind of just do a straw poll on these fundamentally, whether we're generally aligned with this, and then we can then just use the last one as our opportunity to each give our piece. So do you want to ask the questions for us, or should we?
Sure. So the first one is, do you support the design approach for 30 feet of sidewalks and a 20-foot travel lane or emergency access area?
All right, and then everybody who's in support, you want to just raise your hands?
What if I have a yes, but?
That's fine. I think,
Like all
yeah.
of these.
Then I think let's keep that opportunity. So if you want to expand, go ahead. But I think it was everybody said yes, correct? Any abstentions, any no's? Okay, go ahead.
Okay. I would just reiterate that, yes, I support that, but I would emphasize that we must retain bicycling the entire length of the project. And I also I am intrigued by, the like 40-20 idea of if there are areas that maybe need more space rather than taking up the transit line for line dancing or something like that.
May I offer a response to this? It's from a factual point of view. The 40-20 idea has a significant problem, which is that the right-of-way is so narrow that it's very difficult to shift from one alignment to the other without causing significant damage to the continuity of the spaces and giving certain advantages to certain businesses and others to others. But I think the most important problem is that in order to keep the existing trees, you have to respect their location, and a 40-20 would probably tear down some serious lines of trees.
And I'll just add a caveat. I'm yes to the literal question, in terms of what a travel lane constitutes. I don't want to, have that read into too much. But yeah, we can go to the next one.
Great. The next question is, do you support the use of retractable bollards?
All right, all in favor?
Yes,
All right,
and?
again, then anyone opposed? Just, okay. And the yes ands, go ahead.
I think it needs to be, hello. I think it needs to be clarified that those are for vehicle intersections? Because that wasn't clear, there was anyway, not for pedestrian. Those won't be retractable. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Any further?
Yeah, my addition would just be, I support the use of retractable bollards, but just reiterating, I think what you updated in the plan was, what was the original with the concave layout, I did not like at all, but the more convex one, that does not create that easy stopping zone that's perpendicular to the transit path, I think is much better.
I agree, yeah. Any further comments? I would just say we have to be very protective of who controls that remote, and I would lean to the most conservative version of that possible in terms of city approved, city staff only ideally. I could see that there's going to need to be some sort of service vehicle appointment system or something, but that's my only comment. All right, any further? We'll move on to the third.
Okay, the next question is, do you support the civic and commercial district as the highest priority investment area?
All right, all those in favor? All those against or other? Because I have mixed views about this. All right, we can just go through a discussion on this point.
Could we actually take the hands up again for those in favor?
I don't
just
think-
so I could get the count.
We can do a roll call, but let's make the options yes, no, or other, just because I
Yes,
think
but.
a lot of us are going to land in the other category.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
So-
let's just do roll call. It's easier.
Roll call.
Rodriguez,
Yes.
Blackerby,
Yes, but.
Baki,
Other.
Seachside,
Yes, but.
Smith,
Other.
Metzenberg,
Other/abstain.
Bickford,
Larry?
Okay. All right. Who wants to explain themselves first?
Highest priority investment area first. I guess is my take of, and in understanding how this has been laid out of like, let's focus, oh, I was gonna sneeze. Let's focus on that first to get it done and really and yes, it may be the most expensive. It probably will be. But when we talk about high priority capital projects in the city, sometimes that means something else, I guess. So my only caveat is, I think that should be our first investment area, first priority. But to be clear that it's not just we blow absolutely everything on that, and then the other ones, it's like, well, 15 years from now, if something comes along, maybe. To keep looking at it as a holistic thing, which I think you will, but again, we may all be irrelevant in 10 to 30 years, right? So just making sure that it's set up in a way that it's not just kind of like we quit after that.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to expand? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, but I feel that, again, De La Guerra Street and De La Guerra Plaza are the centers of that revitalization. I would not really be in favor of varying the general cross-section that runs through the full project length in that area. I mean, by that I mean, really that I don't want to, there have been some plans floated to like restrict bicycle traffic through some center areas to make them like center pedestrian spaces, and I see that as the role for De La Guerra Plaza, and that I do not think that should be the plan on any strip of State Street. And then I think, similarly, I think I'm fine with it being the highest priority of the zones, but I see, the work of all of the work that needs to be done, things like the bollards and the stormwater kind of are higher priorities than decorating any one zone.
All right, well, I'll just explain pretty much exactly the same as Vice Chair Slishag. Yes, if we do De La Guerra Plaza simultaneously, I'd personally feel like, we could have and should have kept going with De La Guerra Plaza. I understand the thought process of trying to make sure that they work, but there is also just a wall of buildings that's never going to go away, that's going to separate Paseo Nuevo and State Street and De La Guerra Plaza. And so I think, I've felt ever since I was a child that we are lacking that plaza that really fits what Santa Barbara is supposed to be, and I want to see it done as fast as possible. So if there's a way to tie them together, and that means, the economies of scale doing the center blocks in De La Guerra Plaza simultaneously, then I would say yes, that is priority one. If that's not the case, though, I think the ends are actually where we need the highest priority investment. The 1300 and 400 block are the ones that are struggling the most, as far as I understand, and I know that they are more complicated to deal with, and from the one-ways and all that other stuff. But I think I'd almost rather focus on the gateways and then work our way in, because I think establishing like this is the place from end to end, people will naturally filter towards the middle. And also I think with now having some clarity on what Paseo Nuevo is going to look like, we are getting tremendous investment right in this area. And so I don't want to shortchange the others while that's happening. So that's my thought.
Like what you just said, but more simplifying it is not at the expense of the other areas. That would be my position.
All right. Any further comments on this one? All right, well.
I think it's all been said.
It's all been said? I think so. All right. Any other kind of questions you want to poll us on, or should we just share our
I think
thoughts?
for the rest, it would just be open to comments, and I would just ask that you focus the comments really around transportation and circulation as much as possible.
Sure.
Just around transit and bikes and pedestrians and vehicle use of the space. But would take any other comments from the committee.
All right, great. Well, who wants to start us?
I can.
Go ahead.
It changed a lot after the presentation, so I don't know if this is going to be cohesive. In general, I like what you're doing, so I have some critiques, but, the those are the things to say. First of all, I agree with you that, State Street should, it has to maintain its bike lanes because there really isn't any other choice if we're going to have bikes at all. And I understand that we have to open it up for access so that businesses can get trucks and so forth. But I talked to a lot of people I know about it who have nothing to do with bikes, and they all thought it was a terrible idea to open it up to cars at 10 o'clock. Don't do that. I understand that you need to have trucks supplying and taking garbage and stuff like that, and I get that. But I would also say, you were talking about it being, falling within the guidelines for a shareable street. But if you're restricting the hours to, let's say 3 in the morning to 9 in the morning, and you've got 1,500 motor vehicles, that's equivalent to being, above 5,000. And a lot of those vehicles are going to be big trucks that stop in the middle of the bike lane. As a bicyclist, I don't think I would I think it's wide enough. And if people aren't driving cars casually up and down the street, and it's just that, it would be okay. But if you just have it open up to regular old traffic, and you have delivery trucks and garbage trucks and all that stuff, that's going to be a nightmare. And then the other thing that I really wrote a lot about, and then you actually addressed it quite well. I've been harping in these meetings for the last couple of meetings about the fact that all of the rules we had about bike lanes kind of went out the window because of the advent of e-bikes. And from the pictures I saw of the street, it looked like everybody with an e-bike, and everybody, all the kids on hacked e-bikes are going to be going 40, and then everybody on a class 3 is going to be going 28, and that's what it's going to look like. But I do think if you do the kinds of things you were talking about with changing the textures and so forth, and Larry, I think we can come up with different textures that are all high friction. We don't have to put slick surfaces next to the sticky surfaces. It can be different colors or different, maybe it's bumpier but still sticky. Anyway, I think that's making the bike lane narrow, keeping the northbound separated from the southbound by a certain number of feet. I think that's important. I wish you could put bends in it. I understand that you have arguments against it. And I see I also thought about the fact that businesses are going to be kind of pissed off about being on the outside of a bend. But yeah, it's like I said, I just think all of our old bike lane thought processes have to kind of be thrown out to a certain extent because, everybody is, not everybody, but half the cyclists out there are now like going at Tour de France speeds. What else? Oh, this is a minor comment. Like the discussion about policemen and firemen always getting their way, and I'm spitting into the wind here. They talk about, they don't like speed humps or anything like that. They're never going to be going fast up and down State Street for all the reasons that we've brought up. They're going to be using Chapala, Anacapa and zipping over and going down half a block. So anything you can do to calm down traffic calm down the e-bikes without making them crash, I think is fair game. And I think you could convince the cops that they'll have to make fewer trips there if you do those things. And I don't know what they are, but. Yeah, one thing, this is maybe more personal. As a cyclist, I don't like the idea of having the bike lane being the low drainage point. We don't, in this country, we typically don't have bikes with fenders and mud flaps like they do in Holland. And so if all the water's going into the bike lane, bicyclists just either aren't going to ride or they're going to show up to work soaked or whatever. I'm not sure if there's anything you can do about it, but it's a concern. I'm done.
All right, thank you. Who's up next? Committee Rodriguez, you ready? Metzenberg?
Sure, I'll go. I wrote down a lot, but this is a transportation committee, so I'm really going to try and keep this on transportation. Everything you guys designed is beautiful. I'd love to see downtown look like that. From a transportation perspective, there's no transportation fix that alleviates the key challenges here on State Street. It could help a little, but it's not going to be a magical silver bullet. And I don't think there really is one thing that's a magical silver bullet. There's one thing that I've really seen missing from the key challenges. When we address any problem, before we start planning, we really need to fundamentally understand the problem and what its root causes are, not treat symptoms, but treat the problem. In the early 2000s, right around 2005 to 2010, the city did something very uncharacteristic. It let businesses organically form and do things, and the funk zone was created. It's not something the city normally does. They really control things pretty tightly if they have their druthers about it. By doing that, the city did something that you were talking about that was kind of the opposite of what you're talking about maintaining a tight city center, a core of really the heart of a city. They fragmented the heart of the city, and they gave State Street something that it has never had in its life before, and that's competition. Another place, another civic center where people go and enjoy themselves with much lower costs for business owners, and it pulled a lot of people down there. And I only mention this because if there is any solution to that, it is to unify your now two city centers together, and there may be a transportation element there. Some sort of network of public transit for free that would network those two together. I'm just spitballing here, but that is a huge problem that is left out of this conversation, is that State Street has competition, and it never, ever in the history of this town did before. So everything else has nothing to do with transportation, so that's it.
Well, my comment is not directly related to transportation, but it'll be brief. Milpa Street is an extremely important corridor for the Spanish-speaking community in this town, and it is the main downtown, used to be, until we have our current very, very terrible political problems, and people are afraid to even go out on the street now, as we all know. I don't need to go into that. So if the political climate were different, Milpas would be very busy, and it has wonderful restaurants and stores where they sell piñatas, and everything is very festive and beautiful. And Mr. Polizoides made a very eloquent picture of State Street being more for all income levels and all types of people. It doesn't have to be Bergdorf Goodman's, it can be Kmart, somehow. And I think if there were a way to ensure that we could get stores that are not found usually on State Street, that would be really cool. And that's sort of analogous to the funk zone issue. finding a way to diversify what State Street could become. And it may happen with all the housing. It just may happen. So that's it. Oh, no. I want to say, I want to say this is, as other people have said, this is an amazing vision. And I think we are extremely lucky to have Polyzoides and Moule involved, and that the city made a very, very good decision in retaining their firm. They're highly sought after, and I think we should be very appreciative that they decided to work with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Agree on that point for sure, and I think it's largely lovely and well considered. I think that first of all, the fact that you mentioned performance-based parking made my little heart sing. It's like the third rail in town. We still people on council who are ostensibly progressive environmentalists who are like free parking, and it, as a planner, makes me crazy. So thanks for mentioning that. Perhaps that's a component. That may be what we live or die on, sort of politically in this town. But I will be on that barricade with whoever wants to come with me. So I think that's important, and that ties into curb management, right? I think there needs to be more about that, and a lot of that's going to be the zero blocks, because it's a bit of a mess right now, and I think that, and there's tons of studies done about this, and there's lots of good work happening in other cities, and there's all kinds of technology to help you do this, but giving everyone their place to be really reduces conflicts, right? I mean, that happens with modes too, but this is, years ago, taxis used to exist. There's like 5 left. But in Santa Barbara, there were no taxi stands. There were no areas marked as when State Street was open to cars. And it was a mess. And they were everywhere, okay? And the city went, you know what? Let's paint some white curb or yellow or whatever it was. And it sorted things out. Some of it was on side streets. There was some on State Street. And it helped. Cut to rideshare. Absolute disaster. And I remember biking down State Street, especially in the evening, especially in those hours we're talking about maybe having private traffic. You were going in and out while they were parked there. Frankly, the 400 block, it's that way right now. People just park on the 400 block to show off their car or to pop in to get delivery food, whatever. That's an enforcement thing I'd love to see fixed like yesterday, but it definitely can't continue. And that is something that if we're being clear about where delivery trucks can be on side streets, where rideshare, where there's disabled spots, and yes, even priced parking maybe, I think that is going to solve a lot of issues, and will solve a lot of issues that I'm definitely against putting private vehicle traffic on the street. But if for some reason that were to happen, you will have huge problems if you don't manage the curb, right? But I think you have to do that anyway. So I think it's important to actually include that in the plan. And I think that's something that should happen and could happen with a little bit of paint and some signage, like pretty soon and for pretty cheap. But that's really vital. Chapala Anacapa, Hailing Gutierrez, I think it's a super bad idea to honestly even study it, because I think the professionals can tell you that dog won't hunt. It's just not going to work to make him 2 ways, or to say, oh, well, maybe we can do a bike lane thing. There's just so many driveways on Chapala and Anacapa. I think it would be more dangerous to put a bike lane there, to be honest. There was a mention earlier about we don't need to drive down the main street because people find businesses other ways, right? And you pulled out your smartphone. The concept of getting around town and you've gone too far. Maybe I'm just in my own little bubble, but I don't know how many people, especially if you're going to a city you don't know, who aren't using some kind of mapping software to tell them where to get to. So I think that problem may be abating to where they're not just like hunting, where even am I? Is there parking? All that stuff. Like some research has been done in advance. So I think that might mitigate some of the issues that we see. Vision Zero, safety. Just have to harp on it. Really important. Something that our city believes in, something Public Works fights really hard to put in to a lot of capital projects. I think that really has to be mentioned more in this plan. Transit. Surprise. I care about transit. Existing conditions slide or has all those different layers. Unfortunately, in the existing conditions and in the Appendix C, it's as if the only transit that exists downtown is the golf carts and the downtown waterfront shuttle. There's a robust transit network on Anacapa and Chapala and through some cross streets. I won't go into all of them, but just off the top of my head, I can think of 7 different transit lines that travel within a block of State Street and cross it, and there's a large transit hub there. If we're talking about this, of adding a couple thousand housing units, you know, we have to talk about that. And it already exists, and then think about, yes, we need to get people around their new neighborhood of downtown, and the people who already live downtown need a way to get around or to get to the waterfront. But people also need ways to get elsewhere. They do exist, and that's part of the network. And so I would like to see that reflected because it's already there. So it just, right now, it looks like, gosh, there's no transit downtown. There is. There could certainly be more, but just to reflect what's actually happening there. I brought up the renderings or elevations or frankly details about the pullouts for transit. And I attended the council meeting where you gave a presentation, which was wonderful. And it's like, we're not getting into the weeds, but it would be, we want to have flexible, right? That's good. Things could change. It could be a different kind of vehicle, whatever. That detail about transit, whether it's the thing in the picture, the golf cart, whether it needs to be a smaller transit vehicle, but a real transit, low floor transit vehicle that carries more people because it's going to be busy and it's, going to be a dense neighborhood. I can't stress enough how important I think it is that the consultants get to have a dialogue with the people who are providing transit service in this community today and who probably are going to be involved with it, whatever it looks like. It just has to happen. Even though you're maybe not in the weeds, even the concept, if it's a certain thing and then years later it's like, hey, so what do you guys think? Too late. It's too late. And I don't think that's the angle. I don't think anyone's trying to do that. But in the short amount of time left, please, 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 please meet with the transit district. Thank you. Because there are details about rolled curbs or about a kneeling vehicle and ADA. There's a lot of different flavors of ADA accessibility. So I think that's really, really important. Accessibility, I think there needs to be more about it, honestly. So I'd love for some of that to get sort of fleshed out. And just to put a finer point on it, please no vehicles. If it were to happen, it's delivery stuff and maybe 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. And that's kind of what happens now anyway. Like Marburg's not coming down there at 10 p.m. to get trash from dumpsters that don't exist on State Street, and delivery vehicles aren't either. And delivery vehicles were a massive, massive problem pre-COVID, same as Lyfts and Ubers, honestly. So there are ways to manage that. I think we can learn from other cities who have, kind of, I know we don't have like perfect back of house on the side streets, but it's something that I think we can think a little harder about that. I'm glad to get to this point. Bike parking, please. Good, safe bike parking, and our bike share. I think that I envision that being sort of a little more fleshed out in the plan to make sure that we designate that in ways that make sense. And it's not transportation related, but thank you for mentioning public restrooms. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Committee Member Vickford.
Is it appropriate or not to include the discussion of funding for the electric shuttle in this process or another process? That was a question for you guys, because I don't.
Yeah, committee member, I think certainly you could comment on that, or if there is a question specific to it, I can try to answer it.
Oh, I was just wondering if it's appropriate to include it within this plan, that there should be funding for
Oh, I see what you
an
mean.
electric
I'm sorry.
shuttle.
Yes, I think we could look at including some kind of policy or strategy around funding for a more permanent shuttle operation on State Street.
Okay, and my second point is it was discussed about the need to expand the cultural experience for pedestrians, and a simple way to do that, and it's been implemented in other cities, is simply to put on the street a directory listing saying these are the merchants in this block, these are the restaurants in this block, these are the points of interest and other cultural things that are over in that block on Anacapa Street or wherever. Just a way so, as you were talking about, instead of having to reference an app, just have it be there right in front of their face as they walk down the street. That's it. Thank you.
All right, I have several comments. I think overall, this is a plan that really celebrates State Street. And I think you said it well, that our downtown area really is an impressive mix of like City Hall and the library, and also bars and retail and lots of things. And in lots of other cities are, sometimes there's like the boring, serious government district and then the like fun area. And it really is special that all of that is kind of in one area in Santa Barbara. I appreciate that this feels like a really holistic plan that I think does acknowledge some of the challenges that I don't think are always mentioned elsewhere. Like some of the ones I saw were the challenges of like some of our retail buildings are these huge, deep spaces that become like 3 businesses kind of back to back, and then the one in the back goes out of business because no one sees it. I'm a little concerned that some of the intent to kind of, you have these defined furnishing zones and reducing clutter and maybe like, making the whole place a little nicer might kind of, like some of these businesses a lot of the businesses that are tucked back in other paseos have gotten used to having A-frame signs. And I think we can have more of the signage. You had some examples of signage, and we've talked about place setting, but I think some of them, when they're making their own art and their own signage, you also are expressing like the vibe of your business and what sort of place it is in a way that I think could get lost in like very, very standardized like bronze street signs. So I would like there to be some space for kind of creativity and individuality. I love an infrastructure plan. I love the heavy focus on stormwater, acknowledgement of the need for restrooms and benches, stuff like that. Hillary touched on this, but near the end, I think you list some of the performance indicators that I think you could evaluate this on. And I would really like to see one of those performance indicators specifically mention Vision Zero. And that this plan be evaluated on how it is, how like relative to pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, pre-master plan, post-master plan. serious injuries and deaths along the area, because as I think the plan says, we've already made really great progress on that, and it deserves to be mentioned. This is very small. I think on page 113, it's a layout of, I believe, the 500 block, but the little dotted line is around the 600 block. I like the concept of the different zones. I feel like, when I was a grad student, I spent a lot of time in what we're calling the entertainment zone. Now that I'm a little older, I'm more of a civic zone kind of person. And so I think that really does lend itself to the, this is for everyone. There are stages. Yeah, I think it's a really kind of great way to look at it. Civic zone, I think we already touched on a bit. In the entertainment zone, it's referred to as the most economically vibrant, while one of the 3 blocks is noted as having the most vacancies, which I think just really drives to home the issues with the 400 block. I think something that's really nice about this plan is how it's emphasizing on connecting through paseos, connecting to City Hall, connecting to the library, kind of spreading into the side streets. But the 400 block really is the connection between State Street and the hotel waterfront area, and then from there, the funk zone. And it is this strange, sad gap in that network. I know there's circulation, Haley and Gutierrez might mean that it never, maybe there's cars on it, maybe someday that changes. But one thing that I think is an issue now is you have mentioned the bike paths on either side of the 400 block, but I bike through there quite frequently, and I think as we're revising this now, it is a major issue that when you're biking up State Street and you're on a bike path on the right-hand side, you pull up to Haley and cars are only turning right and they're looking at the cars who are only coming from the left, and you are on the right side of them. And so that path needs to be reconfigured to pull bikes to the center, and there needs to be a bike-sized gap in the barricade so that bikes can go straight through and not have to cut around to the little side where pedestrians are also crossing the street. And that could happen tomorrow. But yeah, I think that is a major issue right now. Landscaping, I think we do need to reduce some of the planters just to avoid trapping the pedestrians in separate zones. Bike and pedestrian mixing and the sort of center bike path. I think I am going to disagree with where I think Chair Bakke is going here. I've come around, and I think I actually now like the lower transit area more than the fully flat street, because I think primarily it's going to help define the pedestrian and bike transit zones better than a flat plan. This is, of course, assuming we have drainage that works and meets Conrad standards, which I know nothing about. I think the focus has been on keeping pedestrians safe and separate from bicycles, but honestly, as someone who rides my bike through there, we need to keep the pedestrians from wandering around in the center of the street and staring at the sky, and maybe it is. So I think, I do think we need that area kind of lowered and defined and separated very clearly, and to encourage the pedestrians to stay in their lane. I do think, I'll touch on this a little more, but also with the flat, I think another risk with the flat plan is even if there are only utility vehicles on State Street, a lot of utility vehicles are large trucks, and American trucks hoods are just too high that they should never be on a flat street around pedestrians or children, even as utility vehicles. We're not even talking about private vehicles. So that's why I think we do need a lowered area with some kind of curb. We absolutely cannot make pedestrian-only blocks in the civic zone. So I work at UCSB, as I think a lot of people know, and I do some bike infrastructure work there. And several years ago, there was a plan to build a new building that was very, very needed, but it ended up having to be placed directly upon an existing bike path. And originally, there was a plan to reroute the bike path. Eventually, the plan became remove the bike path, make it a pedestrian path, and then bikes can bike over a ways, across, and then back. It would be very, very similar to, rather than going for one block down State Street, going over to Chapala, down a block, and then back over. It would be a very, very similar arrangement. And it was an absolute failure. Bikes cut through, not a single person ever walks their bikes. There's all kinds of signage that gets put up saying to walk your bike. That signage gets destroyed. The police will come out there to enforce. People will loop around them, walk their bike 20 feet, and then as soon as they leave, they're doing it. I actually just submitted a proposal to talk about this as a failed project. It has become known as Hotspot 1 as far as bike infrastructure at UCSB. We are 2 years later, we are going to replace the bike path that was removed for about $1.5 million. And $900,000 of that is from a fund that's specifically for bike infrastructure, but could have been used elsewhere. And $500,000 of it is from undesignated university funds, which I think, given how broke the university is and how tight funding is, the fact that we are willing to use undesignated funds towards this shows just how bad it is to try and remove bike infrastructure and expect that that will be a better experience for pedestrians instead of much, much, much worse. So the best infrastructure for pedestrians is good separated bike infrastructure. Okay. This is a smaller detail that I know probably doesn't need to be finalized today, but I do think the mid-block pedestrian crossings need flashing lights so cyclists can see their intent sooner, because sometimes pedestrians just stand on the curb and look at stuff. Sometimes they intend to cross. It's nice to know what they're doing. I appreciate that the plan emphasizes keeping bikes on State Street and emphasizes the drop in injuries. I appreciate the acknowledgement that bikes are the choice for children, elderly, and disabled. It's not, or those who don't have or can't or don't want a car. It's not some like biking latex elite or spandex elite. No, maybe not latex. That was weird. Sorry. Let's see. We talked about the arrangement of the bollards. The bike parking is always on the sidewalk. Is it possible to get bike parking that's a little closer? And if we have the rolled curbs, it should be a little easier, but right now it's always up a flat curb and I end up riding my bike for a quarter of a block because I go to where there's a driveway and then go up on the sidewalk and ride to a bike rack. So I would love to have that fixed. I also did notice the stripes of material. I do think, having really looked at it, the striping makes sense to kind of try and keep people in a lane, but I also did think that some of that looks like it's much more slippery than the other, and I think we just do need to make sure those materials match. It makes sense to try and keep bikes, I know, especially given that we have to have this 20-foot space. I think it does make sense to try and have it be a little narrower to kind of naturally reduce speeds, and I can see how the materials do that, but bikes do need to be able to pass each other, and so they do need to be able to transition from one material to another. Overall, I think this part of the presentation has touched on all of the ways that this plan has engaged with the public. And I do agree that there's been a huge amount of public engagement. But in a city council meeting, when people have their opportunity to speak and give their opinions, most people really have like 1 minute to say their piece. And with that 1 minute, no matter how much we highlight or how much the plan highlights flexibility, and that's the goal, most people in that 1 minute have chosen to focus on asking that private cars not be allowed back on State Street at any point. City council keeps saying, you know, we're not making that decision at this time, we're separating this out. But I think until council is ready to commit to what the public is asking for and not have private vehicles on, and no one's talking about utility, no one's against having an ambulance on State Street. But no reason has been provided as to why a private vehicle needs to be driving downstate at 10 or 11 p.m. And I think until council commits to not allowing private vehicles on State Street, we are going to see that engagement, everyone who tries to engage will continue to use their 1 minute to focus on this one issue that is, the community is saying is very important. And we're not going to be able to ever talk about the landscaping or the decor or the districts or all this other cool stuff, because when you have 1 minute, you don't want cars on State Street, and that's just going to be what your focus is. So I think the sooner we can make that, the better. There was a op-ed in the Independent today that I think emphasized that like we should stay as we are and retain the flexibility. And by that, I think they meant allowing cars while we wait for data to provide us like the best option. But I really just want to go back to this that was in the plan that says comparing the 5 years prior to closure to the period following, average annual collisions dropped from 17.6 to 5.9. Average injuries fell from collisions to half. We have the 400 block currently has the largest concentrations on State Street, while one block up, the 500 block, which is closed, has seen the greatest sales tax growth increase when comparing kind of the before and after quarters. So I'm not sure what evidence anybody is looking for. I think we have the evidence. We know that having this space not have cars, be a bike and pedestrian friendly space is what people want. It is working. We can move on. It's time to move forward. We can make this pretty. We can make it happen. And we just need to stop acting like we're just waiting for more information. And I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
Well said.
This is closing in on our longest meeting, but I have an idea that I got while we were all sitting here that I want to share. And that is that we don't have the large city buses on State Street. You know, they are on Chapala and Anacapa and all around the town. My husband really uses the bus a lot, and it's so tragic that there's hardly anybody on it. And it occurs to me that I haven't ever heard anything, and I may just not know. I think part of the State Street plan, if it could be done, would be to direct people to the transit center on Chapala. It's a lovely building. It's one block off of State. And if there could be some directionality created so that people could, they don't have to just use the little fancy shuttle buses. There's plenty of real big buses that go down by the beach and then come back around, and they could get used to using the back streets and go to the beach. It's real easy to get to the beach on a bike. I mean, in a bus, but hardly anybody does it. I just think it would really be nice if you could roll that in somehow. Wouldn't cost a lot of money, just directions. That's it.
All right. Well, thank you all for your participation. I think, yes, this is a long one, but it merits it given, the scale of the importance of this discussion and what we're looking at for our main street. I first want to just say thank you to Tess and to Stefanos and, your team and the city staff who've been working on this for half a decade now. And like, this is how we do things in Santa Barbara. It's maybe we could speed it up next time, but, I think we've gotten to a great place where there is more consensus than there used to be. I think we have to acknowledge that. I came into today expecting to disagree on really important points with folks here tonight, and I really don't think I am. I agree with virtually everything that has been said by the rest of the committee. And I think that's just a testament to how much work you've put in to really listen to all the stakeholders. Full transparency, as I'm part of the group Strong Towns, and Tess and Stefanos have come in and have presentations and talked to us, and really shared their thoughts and pushed back on us when they thought we were wrong in a really, I think, like, fair way. And I think we've landed in a really good spot where I am definitely, I'm so attached to this. This was not like an ideological anti-car thing for me. I had no experience until the summer of 2020 when coming back here on a summer break with a closed street in America. It seemed like a foreign concept, right? And I came, and it was really just like this for me. Like, oh, wow, this is better. Full stop. I used to work on the State Street that we had before. I remember Tyler Hayden's article like vividly in 2018 about State Street is dying. The city hall is doing the brain trust. How can we bring back State Street? And the discussion was, part of the ideas was, what if we got the cars off of there? Because why do we need them? There you can't park, like you can do the drop-offs on the cross street. You can park in the garages. There's a lot of safety issues back then. I mean, it wasn't the most dangerous street in the city, but it was the third most dangerous street in the city. And now it's not even on our list of 80 streets that we've had at this committee before. And I think, the vice chair said it like exactly. We have all the information we need. And I just want to say, the reason I asked so many questions and have pushed on some of these design items is I really believe in this, and I want to make us get to a place where this works for 30, 40, 50 years, and then we can talk about doing something else when technology, and we have hoverboards that we have to accommodate or something. But, I want this to be like built in the next 10 years or something, ideally, and, people be happy with it. And so I just want to say I support fundamentally the plan. I do still prefer I feel like you can't blame me for liking the flat and flexible when it's in the plan 100 times from different cities that look beautiful and gorgeous. And, we've been seeing it in other things, and, Harrison Design and the volunteer architects had that. And so I think the only reason I got so attached to it is I thought that is kind of what we were doing for many years. And you have softened me on that in terms of the facts of the matter and why there are trade-offs and important considerations on the rolled curb and the intersections. I think the curb, I can live with it. I think there is a really good point that the vice chair made about the importance of delineating the space. We aren't making a park. We're not making a plaza. We are keeping it a street that doesn't have general private vehicle traffic needed, in my opinion, but you still need to delineate that space. And I think it's a good way to do it and do the stormwater simultaneously, so long as that curb isn't so large that people constantly feel like this is where cars should be, and that we have this conversation forever. Because that, to me, is the only thing I could see going wrong, is we just have this argument over and over again for 25 years. And there might be a case where it's like, oh, obviously we need a car on this block for drop-offs or this, but I think the flex scheme in the bollards gives us the flexibility to say, we don't need to reopen the Granada block just for Granada shows and, piss off a bunch of the businesses on there, right? Like, I think I'll say it, I think we've learned a lesson from that experiment. And I think the bollard would be a perfect example of where you could just lower it for that one instance, and it's manage access. And so I think we're going in a really good direction with that. I would harp a little bit and suggest a compromise of sorts on the intersections and the raised intersections. I totally see how that could be a big challenge with stormwater management. Excuse me. If you had a rolled curb and then had to go through the intersection and Tess, you made a good point, like how needed is it really to have a raised intersection through the whole crossing? I do think you do need something though, to calm the traffic that crosses. I know that that's a controversial word these days, calming traffic, but I mean, it's imperative. Like that is where the accidents that are still happening is in these cross streets. I commute on Carrillo, and like, I'll just say an example. We recently just repaved Anacapa Street, and it used to be flat. If you went through the intersection from Carrillo, you could speed up pretty fast and go right through like a breeze. And now there's a bit of a hump. And I didn't know there was a hump the first time until my car, I almost hit the roof the first time because I drove it like every time. And now I know, okay, I have to slow down and go up and down over the dip. And I think something like that, we need to be okay with it. I think emergency vehicle response times and access are important, but they also have to be balanced in the overall context of what's good for public safety in the public realm. And so my suggestion on that is to raise the crossings between State Street so that for the pedestrian crossing State Street, you're never going down into the street. And so that it's just a little bump that goes up and down as the cars drive by. And so the stormwater can stay level. So if you're a bike or a transit vehicle going through up and down State Street, you're at a consistent elevation. And if you're a pedestrian crossing it, you're at a consistent elevation, and they're different elevations. So that's my suggestion that I think would make some of the advocates for the old flat and flexible raised intersection idea a little more happy. I do think, just with the public discussion that's out there and all these op-eds and stuff, we do need to kind of address like this cost and phasing issue. I work in government. $48 to $64 million for a project like this is a bargain. And I think that we just need to own that. If you compare it to the police station, you compare it to Dwight Murphy, you compare it to the State Street undercrossing, you compare it to almost any other project, Cliff Drive, anything, this is a transformative investment for generations into our downtown Main Street. Like, that's worth it. And, Tess mentioned half the cost is stuff that we probably have to do no matter what, especially if we want the housing that we need down there. So I think, I wouldn't be afraid of telling people it's not $100 million, as some have claimed, and it's worth it, and we're not going to pay. It's not like the city budget general fund is going to pay $60 million. This is not how it works. I think I just want to speak generally to some of the stuff that was kind of in how this plan has been framed. I agree about the general concept about accommodating all modes and the benefits of all modes. I just fundamentally disagree with the idea that requires the presence of cars on this piece of State Street. I think the benefits of access that are provided by the automobile can be accommodated without actually driving up and down the street for the general person. Like Sarah said, ambulances, EMS, service deliveries that when they're coming, they're approved. That's all fine. That's imperative that we maintain that access that we've had since the closure, but you don't need Joe Schmo and an F-150 going up and down the street at 10 p.m. I just think it's a bad idea, and I've heard the arguments, and I think it itself to me is an attractive nuisance to be able to drive at State Street at night. I think that is more of a threat to people's sense of safety. It's going to be dead. Nowhere in Santa Barbara is popping off at 4 a.m, right? But you don't have to have traffic coming up and down for people to feel safe. And I think if we want to build housing there and we want businesses to stay open later, ideally that can solve that problem. And also having cars, anybody driving up and down at night or any other time creates the noise pollution, it creates air pollution, it detracts from the outdoor dining experience we're trying to lean into that I think makes this the differentiator for our city. Like the reason people go to State Street now, in large part, the reason some businesses I've talked to have signed leases on State Street in the past 6 years is specifically because it is car-free, because it's different, because you can escape Los Angeles and go up here and experience something a little different and without having to fly to Amsterdam, And I think we can lean into that identity for the better and for the better of every business, retail or dining or what have you. Let's see. I think I've said the thing about cars. I won't harp on it. I think these are my questions. Here's my comments. Yeah, I think Anacapa and Chapala is probably the one thing I disagree with Committee Member Blackerby on. I think I agree that it will never be adequate replacement for State Street for cyclists, but I do think we should look at Chapala, especially being so wide. If one side has fewer driveways, can we incorporate a protected bike lane just to say, if you're biking on State Street, it's not to zoom from end to end. It's more of a strolling, check it out, see what's there, and then park your bike right there, which you can do with a bike. You can't do it with a car. And so I think that's kind of the point there. So I think Anacapa and Chapala are trickier, and they deserve study. Gutierrez and Haley, I'm 100% there. I think we should have done it yesterday. I don't think, even as a driver, it is infuriating to me that you have a grid of one-way streets and two-way streets that are consistent except there. And I think it goes back to like way back in the 50s or something, but I just think it's not needed to have those streets to be one way. And I think the real importance to me is the gateways that people have talked about through the years of this process of the 400 block, especially really needs that help. And there's great businesses on the 400 block that aren't dissimilar from the 500 block. The only fundamental difference is the way the public realm is designed. That really is it. And I think if we can make Haley and Gutierrez two-way, and we can make the 400 block cohesive and fit in, and that's the entranceway, like that's going to be a great win. And so, yeah, I think that's pretty much that all said. I just want to say, let's lean into the possibility of this and the Santa Barbara-ness of this as a big idea. I've heard in this discussion, what about Santa Monica? What about Pearl Street? What about this city and that city? Like, who cares? In my opinion, we are Santa Barbara. No one told us, no one was copying another American city when we decided to go Spanish colonial and build the courthouse. We were the start of the movement. Like, we, I think, have a capacity in the city to lead the way on these, pedestrian-centric, car-free spaces on a main street. And, I'm not convinced by these arguments that we have to copy someone else or theirs is shorter, ours is longer. It's just, we need to lean into this possibility, and I'm not afraid of, us doing that. I think we kind of have to end this argument. If it were up to me, you're out of here. All right. If it were up to me, the last thing I'll say is, this would include like a charter amendment proposal to close the street permanently. That's where I'm at. I think the debate itself has become the problem that creates the uncertainty for investment. And, I think we would all be better served if it was a settled question so we can focus on the details like the districts and things like that. So that's my thoughts there. I think it is all very relevant to the master plan that we have before us, and I think we've heard great thoughts from everybody here. So just say thank you, and we'll close it out unless anyone has anything to add.
Wait, we still have another agenda item.
Oh, I know. we'll do that.
And do we
quick.
need a motion on this?
I don't think so. I think they just want to hear us.
No, this item was for feedback only. We will summarize because this is, we tend on our minutes when it's not a specific action, again, that we will have very lengthy meeting minutes. And so that will be reflected, and that would be something Ms. Harris would include as an attachment in the staff report, a report out not only from this committee, but the other committees that Ms. Harris and consultant team are going before.
I hope you'll endeavor. We all repeated ourselves, and it just happened. So please summarize so that the people that read it won't have to be inundated. Thank you.
Let's stay straight, right?
Yes. All right.
All right. Well, thank you both so much. You were in here 12 hours ago doing this, so I can't express enough how much we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much for your comment.
Thank you. And good luck.
All right. Yes, thank you. All right. Well, thank you. I know that this is such a long meeting tonight, but again, it's, we've had, I think we were waiting for that for years now. So it's reflective of building up of all the comments during that time. So thank you again for sticking through the very important topic of State Street. So with that, I'm actually going to put myself on a timer because I know that we will keep this very short. And it was just I mentioned at the last meeting when we discussed the Safe Streets for All action plan that it was going before the city council on the 16th, and we still had a couple outreach meetings, and that it would just be another report back before we headed back for the July 28th council meeting. So we did have two meetings on April 29th and May 6th, one being a webinar, one being in person, with a really specific focus on the proposed approaches for the 10 priority corridors. And I'm happy to report that there was no significant comments, but really good comments. And mainly it had to do with design and an affirmation of some of the study areas that we wanted to look at. I know that we had a few mothers from the Peabody Elementary School really wanting improvements on Foothill at Kylarellis, and so that's been on our radar for a long time. We're proposing to plan a future grant this fall for that particular intersection. So I won't go into any more details. We do have it summarized in some of the comments, and a lot of it's just more of when we move forward, fleshing out those project concepts more, of just going through, because again, the amount of feedback we received has been a lot, and then making sure when we're putting pen to paper again on the more design details that we read through the comments again. And then a city council meeting, it was a packed agenda, but there was really only a couple comments on the plan. And I know we have, as a committee, have spent hours and hours on every single chapter. And I want to thank Chair Bucky for coming to represent the TCC at the June 16th meeting. So really appreciated that. And we had several public commenters, again, in support of the plan, and from the various stakeholders from Strong Towns to Move Santa Barbara County that also collaborated with us on the Safe Routes to School chapter. But with all of that said, there wasn't really significant comments from the council members. There's always the ongoing issue of traffic calming versus traffic safety countermeasures, and kind of as you heard tonight through the State Street effort as well. I think that will continue to always be a discussion, but we don't have a formalized traffic calming program because we just still need to have emergency access, but some of the traffic safety countermeasures are traffic calming items. So anyway, and I think Councilmember Sneddon had just general questions on the high injury network and like the prioritization. Again, we're triaging, but what happens when you fall outside of that, and what does that look like kind of in practice? But other than that, no significant comments. I do have the note that we would be going on, returning on the consent agenda. That is the recommendation at this time. We'll let you know if anything changes. But typically when it's on a consent agenda, there can be public comment. They can pull an item for that, but it's not a full hearing. So it's essentially the staff report that we had for the 16th meeting will be essentially the same for the 28th. And I just can't thank you all enough for all your hard work and hours on this. So we're really excited to return in July. And with that, I'm going to conclude the presentation. If there was anything else that any additional feedback other than that?
You've just reminded me, Cliff Drive, when is that going to be worked on?
Yes, Cliff Drive, we're in the very final design. It's really exciting. And we're down to the like really nitty gritty details and conversations with property owners. And we've actually with committee member Blackerby and MTD and all the fine tunings of every bus stop and all of that. So it's so exciting. And we're gonna go begin the construction process. It starts in the fall within a hopefully construction start date in early 2027. So right on schedule for that.
Any questions? Do you want?
I was just gonna say, congratulations. I mean, I watched I couldn't be at the meeting, but I watched the replay of it. And you did such a good job and all the work that's gone into it. I just am just so impressed, but not surprised at all of how your department and how engineering work together to just put together a really smart plan there's a lot in it, but it doesn't feel like, oh God, this thick plan, you know? The way that it's presented and everything, and I know that some other people in the room had something to do with the graphic design piece, so that really can help tell a story, and I think it did it really well. So the fact that a massive plan like this, having lived through the last bicycle master plan, that it's coming back on consent for approval is just like stunning, so congratulations.
All right. Well, if that's it, I'll just close by saying ditto for the sake of time. And then one tiny thing. The complete streets policy is one of the aspects I am the most excited about. I've made the comment a couple times about the wording. The only things it says, including maintenance and then except maintenance. So that's just, I don't know if that's still something we can workshop on the language there, but I made that comment at council, but that's literally it. So otherwise, if anyone. All right, well, thank you all for your endurance. I think this was a great meeting.
And for the record, we have no public
we
comment.
have no public, oh, yes, that's so true. Derek, are you sure you don't want to? Okay. All right, I think with that, we are adjourned.